Hello and welcome to episode 133 of Stand Up. Joining me today, Dr. Jason Johnson, Wajahat Ali, and Maura Quint. I'm Pete Dominic. Time to stand up with me right now. Well, hello, friends, and welcome to the show. I have three awesome guests, three great conversations, and I'm very happy to bring all of them to you today. Let me start the episode today by reading an email from a listener named Bobby Carter. Hey, Bobby. He says, I listen to your show every morning, and I have for the last 3 years. I absolutely love your soul, and I'm glad you're out there every day keeping everyone informed. Times are tough as a professional photographer right now, but when and if it picks up again, I'll be more than happy to sign up for a paid subscription. I just can't right now. I hope you understand. Then he told me some of his favorite guests. Bobby, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I know a lot of you listen and obviously don't have paid subscriptions, but I love to hear from you anyway. And I appreciate you listening and supporting the show. And if you can at some point sign up, that'd be great, because this is a daily show. I'm doing it all myself and I could use your support. Thank you very much to Deborah Dobbs and Mike Baxter, both who signed up for paid subscriptions today. And I'm sorry I'm not giving those shout outs each and every week to everybody. I really should be. But thank you for all of you. Thank you to all of you who are subscribed. All right, lots to talk about today. A lot happened, and most of it I discuss with my guests. But I do want to just mention a couple of headlines from the day. Of course, the death count on coronavirus in the United States of America is 122,000. And we are peaking again here across the country in Texas and in Arizona, where the president apparently is going this weekend. Why would he go to one of these places and bring people out to see him? I mean, I think we know why, because he's addicted to the energy and to their attention and to their validation. But imagine if some rock star, if Bruce Springsteen or Jay-Z or anybody held a concert, and we're not having any of those festivals, any of those concerts, any of those cultural things this summer. They've all been canceled pretty much, but not this president. No, he's still holding his rallies and bringing people to him. Anybody else would be ridiculed for doing such a thing, but not this president. In other sad news, the European Union announced they may block American travelers from entering because of how much of a failure we have been to control the spread of the coronavirus. American exceptionalism is officially dead when the European Union is blocking us. You don't block us. We block you from coming into our country. What the hell's going on? What is going on? We can't even go to Europe anymore. Trump also threatened to that anyone who vandalizes any monument, statue, or other such federal property would be arrested and face up to 10 years in prison. I don't believe it. I don't think that's going to happen. And I hope that brave people pull down that statue of Andrew Jackson, who he so idolizes so much. I talk with, I think, who did I talk about that with? Waj or Jason Johnson about that one today coming up. The White House also admitted that Trump was involved in Jeffrey Berman's firing after Trump initially claimed that he was not involved in the process. So that's pretty upsetting and important. Today we heard from Dr. Anthony Fauci, as well as Dr. Deborah Birx and others leading government agencies on the current status of the virus. And it's not good. That's the news. It's not good. Fauci is terrified. He says we're not through the first wave. He's really worried about what's to come. And there's a lot more that needs to be done. So I hope you heard some of that long hearing today. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but worth going into and reading about. Also, Election Day in New York State and in Kentucky. It'll be interesting to see the results of those elections, including in my district, New York, fighting 17th, where I was thinking for about an hour and a half of running myself, but I'm very happy I didn't, because that would have been really challenging. And I don't know, I would probably not have even come close to winning, because we've got some great candidates that are running, and I'm excited to see who wins. All right. I've got a lot more great guests coming this week and a lot more work to do. So I want to just throw to the conversations. Let's get it started right now with Dr. Jason Johnson, who we begin by hearing us in the sound check just here at the top. I thought I would include that because it was kind of funny. Dr. Jason Johnson is a professor at Morgan State University. He is a regular commentator on MSNBC, although they've had him on the bench for a while, and that's really upsetting. I don't know what's happening over there, but they got to put him back on TV because he's so good. I love talking to him. You should follow him at Dr. Jason Johnson on Twitter. Read him at The Grio. I'll include links to his latest articles there. And here's our conversation right now to kick us off. I think it's fine.
Okay.
I don't think Zoom would necessarily be any different on your phone.
Gotcha. Okay.
Count to 10 or something.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm a Pisces. I like long walks in the rain.
You do?
I do.
All right. Well, I'm recording. I'm going to just keep that last part in.
Right. Exactly. Jason's is Pisces. He likes long walks in the rain, nature, and Barry Manilow records.
No.
You can contact him.
No. That really? Are you for real with Barry Manilow?
Look, Barry Manilow was music that came out like probably maybe when I was born, if not like long before, but I'm vaguely familiar with it since I remember Muzak when I was a kid.
Wow. That's an interesting thing to admit to on the record, but fine. Fine. You know, we put people in boxes, not only by race and gender, but of course by age and any other number of reasons. And so often we're wrong about their tastes in any number of things. How do you defend against that? How do you defend against making assumptions based on the vessel somebody comes in terms of maybe what somebody might think of as harmless? Oh, the music they like or the food they appreciate.
I mean, you know, I don't usually defend it. I'm very comfortable in just being judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, when the person proves me wrong, or when the person has some completely different set of tastes, I am usually highly intrigued, and it causes like a complete reevaluation of other things. So, like, if you find out that somebody who you've been cool with for years comes forward and says, "I actually think Blink-182 is better than Green Day," like, I may have to reevaluate the friendship. But then I'm going to be like, I need to know why. I need to know why you think Blink-182 is better than Green Day. So, you know.
That's fair, and I love the honest answer because I am I'm very judgmental. You know, I've trained to be as a stand-up comedian based on the criteria I mentioned. But have you ever gone so far as to apologize to a person in public because you judged them in public on the subway or on the street or at a restaurant, and you saw them defy your expectation based on any number of reasons, and then you walk up to them and say, "You know what? I'm sorry, I didn't think you were a baseball fan."
So I have never done that, but I have been found wrong in massive judgments that I made of people that ended up embarrassing me.
Yeah.
This is one of my personal favorites.
Yes, go.
So when I was an undergrad, at the University of Virginia, right, I used to pass this one guy all the time. I was doing an internship downtown, so I would be taking my bike, heading to the internship. I used to see this guy sitting. He wasn't at the bus stop. He was like next to the bus stop. Clothes were torn up and he was really raggedy and, you know, he didn't look clean. And I felt really bad because there is a homeless problem in Charlottesville. So at one point I was like, you know what? I took whatever meager money I had as an undergrad and I like made him a whole lunch. And I went up and I said, hey, you know, I see you here every day. And Lorraine said, you know, give the guy the money. So you know where this is going.
Yeah.
Like later on
he owns a restaurant.
Like that fall.
He's a sandwich. He's a lunch
grad student.
Go ahead. Sorry.
He was a grad student at UVA that I met at an event, and I was like, "Oh my god, I thought you were homeless." He's like, you were so earnest about like wanting to give me this meal that you made that I didn't want to take your moment away from you. But no, I didn't like sitting at the bus stop. I sat next to it. And the fact that you thought I was homeless by how I was dressed speaks volumes about how much grad students are paid. So, yes, I judged him wrong. I thought he was homeless and he was just a poor student.
I think I've got one. Here it is. I was hiring a new producer for my radio show. I had just started. I really didn't know what I was doing on the radio, much less did my, at that time, producer. So they brought someone in to kind of like help us along when we'd first started. I walked in the office at SiriusXM to meet this guy, and there he was, small, skinny, about my age at the time, white guy, and he looked real nerdy. And he was like in a rugby and jeans. It wasn't stylish. Nerdy and stylish and small. And I came in and I basically said out loud, I was like, this guy is going to be our wizard. He's going to be, and I came in strong because I would do that, especially when I was younger, even more so as a comedian. I would try to own the room a little bit, maybe intimidate a little bit, especially in this situation. I wanted to come in and be the guy I was on the air, off the air, of course. And turns out that guy, his name is Brendan McDonald. He might be the greatest radio producer that ever lived. He went
Wow.
on. He launched and still produces Mark Maron's WTF pod. Like, that's who he is.
Damn.
He produced Rosie O'Donnell's radio show. Like, he's been involved with and produced the greatest of all time. And I walked in and thought he was just this little nerd that wasn't going to be able to help me. And I was an amateur radio host at the time to begin with. That's mine. It's not as good. Not as good. I shouldn't have told it. I feel bad now. I wasted our time.
No, I think it was good. I mean, you made a judgment based on size and class and outward appearance.
Mm-hmm.
I made a judgment based on size and class and outward appearance. And we were both later shamed. So I actually think we're very much in the same boat. I mean, mine was based on kindness and altruism, and yours is based on arrogance and dominating the room. But, that's a minor difference.
Such a great point about the difference in character there. Your intentions were so good, and mine were just to be a kind of a dick. Wow. Yeah. I didn't realize how I sounded versus you. All right. I feel like I have to make up one that makes me sound better now. So let me get very serious now and change gears, because the last time you and I spoke, Rashard Brooks was still alive. He has since been killed by Atlanta police officers, and one of them, I think, was he fired and arrested? The other one was suspended. I'm not sure. The chief of police there in Atlanta resigned as a result, and so much more has happened, of course. And it's all, I would say, led to your piece at the Griot, which is what I want to talk about, as well as whatever else we have time for. But everybody should read this. It's titled, "Abolishing the Police is About Customer Service, Not Protect and Serve." Dr. Jason Johnson, you have come out as an abolish the police person, and I'm not sure how good that sentence sounds to most people. Abolish the police.
Yeah, most people it sounds terrible. And one of the things that I sort of talk about at the beginning of the piece is that, look, when people hear defund or abolish the police, most of us think, oh gosh, this is some radical, crazy, nutbag idea.
Right.
But it really isn't, right? I mean, we've been talking about in public discourse, abolishing the IRS, abolishing the education, abolishing the National Endowment for the Humanities. Like, we talk about abolishing government agencies all the time if they don't appear to be doing their job or they're wasting their money. So we should at least be able to have the idea of abolishing the police on the table. And the more I've seen and the more I've read and the more I've paid attention to this, and you know this, I know this from times we've talked, radio, television that I do in my writing, it ain't like I'm a radical. But I look at this from a very sort of sober, realistic way, and we have got to get rid of modern policing. It doesn't work. We can't fix it. It hasn't evolved to the problems that we're facing today, and abolishing it and replacing it with something else is the only way to go forward.
Yeah, it's a good point about the way you stand on politics in terms of, you've been criticized for years for your criticism, on-air criticism, especially at MSNBC, of the far left kind of ideas. Yeah. And this would, I don't know if I care about labels or framing, but I think abolishing the police, defunding law enforcement would fit on the far left as an idea, as a radical idea. So I think it is important to point out how you usually are on other issues versus this one. But when you say, there have been other government agencies that have been proposed to be abolished or even abolished, that's not like the police. That's not like law enforcement. And even though I agree with you, I'm trying to make this conversation more interesting by asking you to make it more nuanced in terms of how law enforcement works and what they respond to, and how that might be replaced with different social services, resources, phone numbers, and personnel.
So the biggest thing that everybody worries about with abolish the police, and again, I talk about abolishing. Defunding, I don't really think goes far enough, which I guess does put me on the far left. But I talk about abolishing. Look, the reason that I talk about abolishing the police is because we can actually replace policing, because it doesn't do what we think it does. Like, our image of policing is like, it's cops and they're stopping you in the nick of time. It's law and order. It's they're stopping crime. That isn't what most police do. That's not what they spend their time doing. The vast majority of police work is really customer service. It's helping you in traffic. It's showing up after a crime has been committed and doing a report on your window being bashed. It's telling a bunch of kids, outside the school, stop smoking. police aren't actually solving a lot of crimes. And in fact, they actually don't solve a lot of crimes: theft, burglary, robbery. You know, if you kill somebody in America, and we don't even have to break this down by region, you got about a 50-50 chance of getting away with it. I mean, so what we expect police to be doing, they actually don't do very well. So we should be focusing our money and our time on the things that have been shown to reduce murders and burglaries and domestic assaults and rape and robbery. We should be focusing our attention there and building a brand new force. And those people who think that we don't do that and we can't do that, it's too radical, it's too crazy. Look, we've replaced school systems. We've replaced hospitals. We've gotten rid of agencies that don't work. So it's not that we can't do this. It's just a matter of political will and not falling for the propaganda that says that if we get rid of cops, suddenly everything becomes the purge and we're going to have to lock ourselves up in our house with a 2x4 and guns.
Yeah, I think that's all, you know, you said a lot, but the only thing I'd respond to is what they do. I mean, one of the things police do is they're there, they're present. They're the security officers at any number of places, and you know that they're around the corner. So that somehow is going to make people behave better or not behave worse, not commit crimes, not commit violence, because you know that they are there, that they are present and can respond quickly in probably a lot of places, most places. But what about just the idea that they're there providing security, whether or not they're responding, that you know that they're there, and the comfort or fear that gives the community?
So that is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, Pete, because they're not there. They really, really aren't. It depends on where you are, right? And depending on what you're asking for, they ain't even the person that you want. Look, if I'm really, really hungry, okay, and yes, there are restaurants that are there around me, but is it what I really need? Is it what I'm in the mood for? Do I really want to do Uber Eats for Burger King? A lot of times, let's say we look at sort of a domestic violence example or a fear of domestic violence. You hear your neighbor screaming and fighting and yelling and dishes and everything else like that. So you call the police and the cop shows up. And the moment that he pulls up in the driveway, the guy looks out the window. He sees a cop. He sees the gun. He sees the badge. Now he's afraid. Now he's yelling at the woman. He's like, oh, my gosh, you called the police on me. I'm going to die. Then it turns into a hostage situation, right? Then it ends up on the nightly news. Then they got to call in negotiators and mediators. What we're calling police to do, they're usually not even the best person for, and that's if they even get there on time. So if you were to put together a better force, and I talk in the piece, I don't care what you call it. You can call it police officers, you can call it the watchmen, the super security GI Joe, I don't care what you call it. But you can put together a force of people who, rather than showing up when we call them, can be a consistent, integrated presence in the community and anticipate problems and solve them. Police are not trained to do that. Police are trained to be paramilitary officers who patrol and respond as opposed to anticipate. And you can't train people out of that. Look, you can't train a guy, you can't train a man or woman who's been trained to kill and defend, right? You can't train that person into suddenly being a school teacher. And we have to stop operating under the assumption that what police are doing today is just a matter of retraining or changing the edges or defunding them one way or another. And that's one of the things I talk about in my piece. If you are part of modern day policing, look, I'm not even saying it's your fault, but I'm saying that the way you have been trained has not evolved for what America needs today. Think of how many instances we've seen in, so let's say, the last 7 or 8 years, Black Lives Matter era. People with autism, people with mental illnesses, people who are having allergic or schizophrenic reactions who end up dead because cops aren't trained to know how to identify
that. I'll
that.
never forget one in particular, which is a woman called the police because her son was acting pretty nutty and potentially violent. And it was her son, and he had severe mental issues, and she had told the police that. He had a screwdriver in his hand, a Phillips head screwdriver, which could certainly be dangerous. But still, it's a screwdriver. They shot him dead. And then I remember after that, as a result, somebody linked to a video from the UK where I think it was the London police responding to a man with a fucking machete. And he did not die. They surrounded him. They weighted him. They handled it differently. The point, I just wanted to illustrate your point about responding to people with mental illness issues, even if they are, acting erratically and potentially violent, should not end in that person's death. He's mentally ill. No. The mom called the police. It was his mother that saw him watch. I forget where that was. I wish I could mention it, but nobody wants to watch it anyway. That being said.
And Pete, that's also the point where you say, well, there's a comfort in having police. Well, not really, because increasingly, and this has always been the case of black folk, but increasingly you have people feel like, you know what, if I call the cops, it's a roll of the die as to whether or not they're going to solve the problem or they're going to make it worse. If I call the police to scare these kids from painting graffiti on the side of the house, is he going to rough them up and bust the kid upside the head, or is he just going to warn them? If I call the police because my next door neighbor, has a drug problem and is kind of staggering out in the street, are the cops going to show up and shoot the guy? Or is there actually going to be somebody who comes here and is like, yo, I think that person's, they got some purple haze. We might need to do something about it. So their presence doesn't necessarily lead to decreased crime. Their presence doesn't lead to an increased sense of safety. So it's time to pull them out and put somebody else in various communities who can do the job better.
No matter what changes we make in terms of the ones we've been talking about, whoever is doing that job of policing a community desperately needs to be held accountable by the public. Yeah. That is not currently the case. That's certainly a proposal with a whole lot of activists. It is not something that have been demanding it for years, maybe even generations. But that's the biggest problem with police today. It's the unions, their unions, that protect them from being held accountable. How important is that simple change? Maybe not simple, important change to hold law enforcement or whoever is doing that job accountable, just like any other public agency or even public company.
It is absolutely essential. And Pete, I've made this argument with you on the air, off the air. I have been saying this for years. I teach at Morgan State University in Baltimore. That's where Freddie Gray was taken on a rough ride by several police officers. They take him to the back of the car. Supposedly he bumps around so much he dies. And, they say they didn't do anything. They couldn't handle it. None of those officers were held accountable. None of those officers ended up in jail. Here's the problem. Police are not held accountable the way that almost any other government employee is. If a public school teacher took 20 kids on a field trip and came back with 17, they're going to jail. Okay, you couldn't come back and be like, whoa, that was a crazy night at the museum. No, you're going to jail. You had 20 kids, right? If you had a public school teacher who was breaking up two kids in a fight, right, and leans on one of those kids to hold them down, and that kid has an asthma attack and dies in the middle of the cafeteria, that teacher is going to jail. The chaperones are going to jail. The lunch lady who saw it and didn't intervene is going to jail. So we have public employees who are held accountable when they make mistakes. But for some reason, police are never held accountable. Some of that has to do with unions, but a lot of it has to do with public will. A lot of that has to do with the culture of modern day policing. If I'm a public school teacher and I get caught, let's say I hit a kid, right? Or let's say I say something crude or something else like that. If you lose your job as a public school teacher in scandal, you got to leave the state. Like no other school system will hire you, right? But all the time, I was just speaking to a police officer in Durham. I've been talking to cops today. I'm here in Charlotte. Cops say all the time, a new guy comes in and the chief's like, yeah, he had a little trouble in New Orleans, but we can take care of him here. Or, yeah, he had a little trouble in Cleveland, but they don't know how real policing works, et cetera, et cetera. There is a culture in policing, modern day policing, that allows cops who have bad histories of violence and abuse of others, especially people of color, where they're just given an opportunity to slide. Timothy Loman, who shot Tamir Rice, had been fired from a police department 15 minutes down the road. And that's a cultural issue. And you can't change culture by just moving a union around. You got to get rid of the institution that supports that culture.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's endless stories illustrating what you just said. I just saw one yesterday where an NYPD officer knocked a kid's teeth out. He knocked a kid's teeth out. He pistol whipped a kid. Knocked a teenager, knocked his teeth out. You know what the kid was guilty of doing? And we don't know if he was even. He apparently saw the police and had a bag of weed and tossed it and ran.
Yep.
They stopped for weed. I mean, and they beat the shit out of him. That cop had put someone in a chokehold and been reprimanded years ago. It was public. Yep. He's still on the force to pistol whip this kid. It happens all the time is all I'm trying to say with that. Let me change gears and talk politics with you while I have a political science professor. I guess this isn't about politics. It's still kind of race, but I wanted to get your take on how important or consequent. Maybe you don't know this. I should have asked you. You probably saw it this morning on Twitter or last night. The president tweeted out a video of a black man beating up a white man at a department store, a white man who had allegedly called him the N-word or mentioned it while he was on the phone. Who knows why? It doesn't matter, actually. The fact that the president – are you familiar with this story? Did you see this video?
I read about the video. I hadn't actually watched it because I try and avoid traumatic videos on a regular basis. The
act of the president of the United States tweeting out a video of a black man beating up a white man is what? What is that? What is that about? What does that mean? What was that for?
The president of the United States has declared war on black people. That is his only method of advancing his agenda, which is to get reelected, because he is a single-minded seeker of reelection. Donald Trump doesn't care about the job. He just wants to get reelected. What it also speaks to is the absolute incongruity between how regular people are able to behave on Twitter and what the president's allowed to get away with. There's a piece I wrote 2-3 weeks ago on the Griot. The guy you can look up, his name is Nathan Caraway, Nathan Caraway. Nathan Caraway is like he's like an artist and a film director, lives in downtown Columbus. Not an activist, not a heavily political guy. He goes out to the Columbus protest about Ahmaud Arbery and helps volunteer at a table for people who've been tear gassed and pepper sprayed, right? Gets caught on camera. The president gets a handle of this video and tweets it out and says, "We know you're out there, anarchist." So the president's 12 million followers, he tweets that Nathan Caraway, who is a regular guy, is an anarchist. The guy got doxxed. His mother's personal information was put out. His phone number was put out. He was chased down the street by some guy who recognized him from, Reddit or Owen or something else like that. His whole life has been completely disrupted because the president routinely terrorizes people through Twitter. So whether he's tweeting out anti-Semitic messages, whether he's tweeting out videos of Trump videos beating up Hillary Clinton, whether he's tweeting out videos of a black man beating up a white dude, Trump's entire message is America is a white man's country, and these terrible colored people are trying to take it from you. And the only way that you can succeed is to join me in fighting back against these people with violence. That is his only message. And this won't be the last time he does it. I'm sure that him and before Brad Parscale leaves, they're going to curate every other video they can find of black men. Trust me, he'll try and find some video of a black man assaulting a white woman or something like that would be even more provocative to racists, right, and put that out there because that's his only message. He can't talk about the economy. He can't talk about COVID.
He's just going to tweet out a video of a white woman having sex with a black man. Like, look at this. This is horrible.
Probably.
Look at what is happening.
And I'm sure he'll complain and he'll say this is terrible. And between the white nationalists who are in favor of it, and trust me, this is a whole conversation, Pete. This is actually another piece I'm going to be working on. There is something, even that imagery. I don't know if you've seen this, but, lately, of course, we've had all these conversations about racism in media, Bon Appetit, New York Times, ABC. There's a great story that just came out in the Huffington Post about racism within pornography. And even the images of interracial sex play these sort of multiple roles in exacerbating racist attitudes and charging them up in different kinds of ways. So yeah. Trump wants to always play at that id, but even that imagery sort of plays different ways depending on who sees it.
Yeah, I was being partly serious with that.
Mm-hmm. I was only partly serious because I'm like I would wonder who we would show. I'm like, if it was somebody famous, I might be like, that is highly intriguing. If it was like some video that like the FBI caught of some celebrity, it might just be funny.
But I mean, he could get away with this is getting ridiculous, but I'm going to say it anyway, with a black man and a white woman making love, like just making love, and then him look at it, it's horrible, and they're like, you'd react with they're making love, it's like, does that look like love to you? And you'd say, you don't know what it is. Sorry, but it's not that far fetched. This because it wasn't long ago, and still is the case that you might not want to whistle at, much less look at. a white woman. Not that we are saying catcalling is okay for anybody, but just the death penalty is not should not be the consequence. So,
and he plays into that. That's his whole shtick. If he can, everything Trump that he can do that's anti-LGBTQA, anti-trans, anti-black, anti-black straight male, anti-woman, anti-anything other than a certain kind of straight white man that worships Trump. Because let's be clear, it ain't like Trump is a friend of white men. He's only a friend of white men who like him. I mean, remember, he called the 75-year-old man who got pushed over by the Buffalo Police Department, who still can't walk. We all remember that viral video.
Right.
I just reading, he cannot walk.
Jesus.
He has not regained the ability to walk.
Wow. Yeah. Well, when you're that age and you bang your head, you bounce it off the pavement. That's not that surprising. I mean,
you're bleeding on the ground, and the cops walk past you. Trump called him a member of Antifa.
Yeah, well, he does, but he's not. But it's also true of him that, and it's important to mention, he likes anybody who likes him. If you're a black woman or a black man and you speak highly of him, he'll bring you in. He'll showcase you. He'll make a mockery of you. And I want to use other words, but I'll let you about what they are doing, to themselves. Because I wanted to ask you about media. But when you hear someone say, defend the president against being a racist by talking about the black people who support him, I wonder what your general response is to, say, a Candace Owens.
So here's the thing. To me, Candace Owens is just like Ann Coulter. I don't really care about people whose entire MO is to troll. Candace Owens has no power other than her ability to irritate people. It's not like she runs an organization that matters. It's not like she's running for elected office. And I think giving energy to those kinds of people is inherently dangerous. I mean, she's not even with Turning Point anymore. So, whether it's her, whether it's Diamond and Silk, whether it's any of these sort of ridiculous people who are singing and dancing and doing this kind of nonsense. What worries me and what I've become concerned with when it comes to Donald Trump and black people is his ability, usually with the complicity of the press or members of the press, to pretend that individual acts of benevolence counteract his overall hostile agenda. So it's like, I'm going to do the First Step Act and, 700, black people or whatever it is are released from prison. Yeah, but you're enhancing three strikes rules in different states. You're ending consent decrees in different states. You're pulling back investigations into police brutality and violence in different states. So let's not pretend that the 5 black people who stand on stage and say Donald Trump was nice to me makes up for the fact of the thousands of black people who you've cut funding to HBCUs, who you have pulled the FBI back from investigating white nationalist organizations that want us all dead. The fact that you have white nationalists like Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon who were at one point in your administration. So, silly individual black folk, they just make me laugh. And trust me, I know a lot of black Trump supporters. And I make a difference between them and, say, black Republicans. Like Michael Steele is one of my favorite people. He is an African-American Republican, former head of the party. He works with me. We work together at MSNBC. But that's not the same as Omarosa. That's not the same as Candace Owens. That's not the same as some of these black people who go out there and say, I love Trump, but they never voted before.
I waited for you to make the most important point about Trump passing, quote, criminal justice reform. You didn't make it. I think it's the most important point, so I want to mention it, which is stop giving him credit for passing this at all. He gets no credit simply because President Obama would have passed all kinds of criminal justice reform and did all he could if Republicans would have let him. They stood in his way in both the House and Senate and never let him do those things. And they waited till Trump came in, and then they passed these things, and Trump gets credit for it. Of course, they would not let Barack Obama do that. But that's the big point I always make about when people talk about what Trump has done, only because Republicans allowed him to do it and not the last guy. But
exactly. Before
I let you go, do you have time for one more?
Yes, I do.
Okay, because I was always trying to prepare for my interviews, even with people who I love and feel like I know really well, like you. Apparently, I don't know Dr. Jason Johnson well, because I always learn stuff about you. And I did not realize that as a young man, you worked with and were friends with Clementa Pinkney, and I wanted to ask you because I noticed this week someone mentioned that it was the 5th year, if you can believe it, anniversary of his assassination by a white man whose name I won't say, but whose goal was to start a race war. And I wanted you to maybe just talk a little bit about that man and what I heard you say about his assassination. I thought this was so poignant and important, the way that you articulated it. You said his assassination was, where I wrote it down here, an assault on black political infrastructure. And I kind of wanted you to just unpack that and mention it as you talk about what the significance of 5 years since your friend and so many others were assassinated in his sanctuary by a man who wanted to start a race war.
Yeah. I think it's important if people want to look at this. It's a story I wrote for NBC BLK. It's called The Clem Pinkney I Knew.
Great. I'll share it in the show notes and on Twitter as well as your Griot pieces.
Right after college. And, he was a great, wonderful guy. I learned a lot from him. The night that he died is sort of seared into my memory, the night that he was killed. I think it's always important for people to remember that, and I don't mind saying his killer's name. I want his name to always be known in infamy. Dylan Roof, it's not just the disgust and the lack of humanity that he sat and he prayed with 9 people and then pulled out a gun and killed them all after praying with them and doing Bible study for an hour. But it's to understand that white nationalists are not praised individuals. It's so easy for the press to sort of portray this as like, oh, it was a lone gunman. No, he was radicalized by online sites and message boards and everything else like that told him, look, destroying the black church, destroying one of the few institutions in America that can be independent of white economic influence, right? Black churches are supported by the funding and the money and they can't be taxed in a certain way. So white business people can't knock them down. They're usually places that are safe from instances of violence. So if you go after a black church, you're going after black political power. And what's more, and I remember having a conscious conversation about this with several other political journalists at the time, that, if you remember Lindsey Graham and Nikki Haley and a lot of the Republicans at the time kept trying to say, oh my gosh, they wanted to make it an attack on Christianity. They wanted to take the racial element out of it. And we had to fight on the air and say, no, this was a terrorist attack. It was a terrorist attack on black people with the intention of frightening us, with the intention of taking out a man who was a powerful member of the state Senate in South Carolina, who advocated for the poor, who was talking about Medicare for all before it was sexy and popular, who talked about police brutality. And I think the other thing I want everybody to understand, Pete, and you probably sort of picked this up from the piece, is when we're talking about Black Lives Matter, when we're talking about police brutality, when we're talking about vigilante violence, because remember, Ahmaud Arbery, Trayvon Martin, Clem and everybody else, these guys weren't killed by cops. They were murdered by just random white people.
Yeah.
Random white people.
Yeah, it's important to mention.
And all of the white people, George Zimmerman, Dylan Roof, the men who killed Ahmaud Arbery, they're all still alive. They were captured alive. And so when you see black people out in the street in pain and suffering and frustrating and challenging ourselves with the dangers of a pandemic in order to make our voices heard, it's because most of us are only 1 or 2 degrees of separation from these stories because they've happened to people that we know. And I didn't know Clem because I was famous. I knew Clem because I was a kid out of college who had a summer job.
I mean, I just have only one thing to add to that really thoughtful response, and it's not every time, too often in American history, and probably so many times that none of us know about, black leaders are brutalized, killed, or assassinated. And whether it be Dr. King or Malcolm X or Clement Pinkney could be in that group, that is a form of terrorism because it intimidates black people from wanting to take leadership roles. That's how it works. That's how terrorism works. And I don't know if there's anything to connect the dots, but people talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, and as much as its critics and the right and the president would love to name a leader and target that person, there really isn't one individual leader. It is I don't know how you would describe the movement. It's a movement. It's not an organization. And so I just want to point out what I think is true of why it's terrorism when you kill black leaders and what it does. But I that's not a scholarly observation. I'm sure there are many more thoughtful observations about black leadership, assassination, terrorism, and what it does to, as you call it, black political infrastructure and movements.
You're exactly right. And I think it's funny, and not funny, but you're making a really good point, because every time I hear someone say, write, tweet, say on television, well, where's the leadership? We need a leader. It's like, yeah, see, whenever we do that, we get killed. Right? like the idea that this movement needs to produce some single solitary male leader, because they never want to pay attention to the fact that, like, Black Lives Matter was created by 3 black women. Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Brittany Pinkney. Like, whenever this happens, there's this sort of cry by a lazy press and sometimes political leaders for some specific leader, as if somehow that makes these issues easier to handle. And what we have learned and how we have evolved in the last 60 or 70 years is, number one, if you have a charismatic leader and a weak movement behind it, if that leader ever dies, then the movement falls apart. Or if that leader is ever discredited, then that movement falls apart.
Great point.
So Black Lives Matter can continue no matter who is running local organizations and local chants, because it's about respecting black. It's like Michael Che. We're just trying to make sure Black Lives matter. Just matter.
Yeah.
And you can't destroy that by getting rid of a leader.
And it's so in this day and age of social media, it's so easy to discredit a person, much less an organization. Case in point, Shake Shack.
Yeah.
Like they got a brutal press based on, I mean, can you imagine if you were accused of poisoning police officers? That's hard to come back from. I mean, and most people that heard that don't know that it was not even remote. There's no truth to it whatsoever. It was made up by the police, and they're still mad at Shake Shack. Not that I'm defending a horribly unhealthy chain restaurant, which is more emblematic of capitalism than almost any other thing in America. But to my point about discrediting, it's so easy to do, even if you didn't do anything wrong. Jason Johnson, always a pleasure. I'll link to all these articles in the show notes, and follow him on Twitter right now. One of my all-time favorite follows, and I always love talking to you. Thanks, pal.
Thanks, Pete. Anytime.
Dr. Jason Johnson, at Dr. Jason Johnson. Follow him. Tell him you heard him here on the podcast. One of my all-time favorites. Love talking to him. Why is he not on MSNBC every day? Why hasn't he got his own show, for that matter? Really smart guy, and I hope that you'll let him know that you heard him here on the program. All right, now I want to get to my next guest, who is another one of my favorites. Always love talking to him. He is a playwright, a lawyer, a writer, a speaker, a hilarious guy, and I love talking to him. CNN just announced that CNN's not renewing his contract as a regular contributor there, which is such bullshit. I'm outraged by that, and I've been saying so publicly, and I mentioned that on during today's conversation, which begins again in progress, because we were talking, and I just hit record. We were talking, he was asking me about comedy and cancel culture and all of that, and Wajahat Ali on Twitter, by the way, at Wajahat Ali. Follow him there, and here is our conversation, which starts in mid-sentence with him asking and talking about comedians and cancel culture.
Or is it just some people being so fragile that they're reacting and they're realizing, we were unable to update our act to match the times, so instead we're going to yell, censorship and whine.
Oh, well, I am more to the latter, but I'm also not. I would just simply say it's not for me to decide if we've gone too far. I follow the lead of, other people who are discriminated against. I don't need to have my opinion heard on that. I have some thoughts on it, but they aren't really important. They aren't. I don't think my thoughts on it are that important. I think that if, that gets decided by the society, the generation that we're living in, I guess, and not by, in my case, like a male, straight, white comedian. I like to hear the defenses. I like to hear those arguments, but they always kind of fall flat for me, because if you don't know the pain of discrimination or of just feeling to be under threat all the time, then I don't really care what you think. I just don't care that much what you think.
You know, I feel like when everyone says, "Oh, they got canceled," like, did they really get canceled? Like, look how much it took to quote unquote cancel Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby. And like, look how much, you know, I'm like, you have to like be you have to rape multiple women over multiple years and have multiple women be ignored for like two of these men to finally be, convicted. And then like the other people who are quote unquote canceled, they're not really canceled. Last time I checked, they're making good money. I mean, Louis C.K., I guess, quasi canceled, but then again, he just refuses to do the Hollywood exercise, which everyone knows he has to do. He just has to go on a talk show, do a mea culpa, apologize, have a profile written about him, like apologize once more, and then you know that they'll accept him, but he just refuses to do it.
Yeah, no, I think he's the best example to look at because of the, things that he admitted to doing and how they're different versus to how he's decided to come back and the massive, fan base that he has had. And I think that the bottom line is what's changed is you can have your own subscription to your podcast and you don't need any ads. So if you're a white supremacist, and you tell me we get out of comedy and talk about everybody else, if you're a Nazi and you host the Nazi show, then the only way to cancel you is to go after your host website, to go after, but you can survive a lot longer when you are being paid directly by your supporters, by your fans. And just going back to comedy, that's the case with a lot of comedians. You could boycott the venue, the comedy club, the theater, whatever they're performing in. I don't think we've seen that happen. Certainly with Louis, people just don't care enough. It depends. It's a case-by-case basis, I think. But I think what's changed is you can't, the revenue model is either more difficult to affect or less. Meaning, if it's ads, yeah, you can still have an effect on that. And we're seeing that, I think, with like Tucker Carlson and others at Fox News and certain radio people over time. But you can still survive if you've got people paying you directly. That's what I think.
The best thing about your show is we've inspired from this conversation probably two comedians. One that will update their act to meet the times, and a Nazi who's like, I can be funny and make a living off it.
Well, I'm not arguing that he can be funny, which I'm open to. A Nazi being funny. I'm saying he's probably angry, screaming into a mic on his YouTube, political show, whatever.
They usually aren't that funny. That's the funny thing. I mean, you have so much material, but they're really not that funny or that smart.
Nazis?
And you would think, yeah, like white supremacists, you would assume like there'd be some well they could delve into to mine some comedic gold, but usually, pretty predictable. One note, The whole thing about the master race and replacement. You want some new material. You don't really. You pretty much see one set, you see it all.
Yeah, I think that's probably true of most white supremacists. They're definitely not funny, But I mean, they're. I'm trying to keep going with this idea and speculate, but they're mostly angry and scared. So like humor is not something they really develop, and if they have it, if you're really racist, racist jokes go way back, obviously.
Oh, way back. Yeah, I mean, just look at blackface in this. Yeah, country.
But I mean, but more black comedians or comedians of color are more likely to talk about race and make fun of their own people for hours on end. And you'll hear a white comedian be like, you make fun of black people your entire hour. I do one joke about black people, and the white comedian doesn't understand why he can't.
Why'd you take that away from me? Why did you take away my right to say the N-word? Or why'd you take away my right to say that one black joke? And it's so interesting too, right? Is because they see that as oppression, and they can't really pivot. Like, I think if they were like really kind of smart, and if they had like an awareness of their privilege, I think so many white comedians could actually do an amazing bit of their entire like intellectual, emotional exercise as to like their grievance as to why they can't do it.
Yes.
And then come out on the other end, oh, this is why I can't do it. Like you need like a Chappelle-esque intellectual through line, which you can develop, right? But I feel like people are so reflexive that they don't invest the time to do that bit, Like if more white comedians did that bit, not only would it be hilarious and like kind of a brilliant commentary on like race relations and white privilege, but it would also win over, I think, a black audience.
Are you familiar with Ted Alexandro?
No.
Well, I would love to see you tweet out his new album. You will love. You will love. He's one of the finest men I've ever met in my life, and he's one of the most respected comedians in comedy. But he's a hardcore. He was like at the Occupy protests, and he's hugely supportive of Black Lives Matter, and very critical of police, and very cognizant of his privilege. He's one. I think Patton Oswalt does a good job with what you're saying too. But I also agree with you that it's hard, and comedians are lazy, and more importantly, people in general, white people in general, are only now, like in the last few weeks, months, years, starting to realize what the privilege means. We all had heard this phrase white guilt. We were pretty familiar with that and being accused of that. And we always, people like me would always respond with trying to explain privilege and that it's not guilt. But don't you think that there is a real awakening because of a lot of different circumstances? But I think some pretty smart white people like Tim Wise and Robin DiAngelo and Right Fragility and a whole bunch of other people doing kind of really good work exposing and explaining what it is.
They've been doing it for a while, and we kind of discussed this last time I was on your show, but we're just in a moment right now where it's you just need a spark sometimes to illuminate the mess that was in front of your face, the stink under your very nose, if you will. And I feel like, this racism thing has been going on for 400 years, this quote-unquote racism thing. But you see the combination of effects, right? You see coronavirus and the 120,000 deaths. You see the recession. I think that's going to turn into a depression. I hope I'm wrong. You see the corruption and the racism of the Trump administration. You see the multiple deaths of black people. And I think it's especially punctuated by the death of George Floyd and the manner in which he was killed. That's right. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I think that's something really profound. The fact that he just sat there and the life was choked away from him as he yelled to his dead mother. And I'm not taking away from the numerous other men and women who were killed. Breonna Taylor, right? You have Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old boy, Eric Garner. But there's something about being choked to death as opposed to being shot to death. Because we're so numb in America, because we're such a freaking gun-obsessed culture, and just look at the gun violence in all of our pop culture. Oh, another shooting, whatever. Oh, another mass shooting. No, Sandy. Look, we just kind of shrug over Sandy Hook.
Well, it's a difference. I would just say that it's a difference between a split-second decision, not that you're ever excusing it, and an 8-minute decision.
8-minute, 46-second decision as the man is calling for his dead mother. And it's on camera. And he's unarmed. And it was over a $20 bill, alleged counterfeit bill.
And the added element that a lot of people are saying, maybe you disagree, that there was nothing else to watch. There's no baseball. There's no sports. You've watched all the shows. You're not going to work. You're home. You're seeing this. You're watching this. And you're angry. And now you're reacting to it.
Well, yeah, but it goes to the previous points. You're under lockdown. You're under quarantine. You're already stressed. People have anxiety.
Right.
And then you have, he's not the first one. It's multiple people. And then finally, I think the last component, which is important, is the organized the organized protest, the movement that has developed over the past several years, like Black Lives Matter. It's decentralized. There's no headquarters which can be firebombed by the FBI, right? It can be infiltrated. It's a hashtag movement that has gone global. And then so you see this movement, and plus a lot of connecting all the dots, a lot of people of color given spaces in once privileged places to air this story, to the point where Black Lives Matter was such a mainstream talking point that Democrats running for office all had to talk about it during the debates. You combine it all together, and then you have this moment. And now finally, in 2020, you have people saying, oh, crap, when we look around the room in the corporate boardroom, it's an ocean of whiteness. This might be a problem. And now you look at the Amazon, even right now, you look at the Amazon top 10 bestsellers, it's White Fragility.
Yeah.
How to talk about race, how to be an anti-racist.
The movies and shows being watched and streamed and bought and downloaded as well. There's a similar thread in that.
Yeah, and so for me, looking from the outside, if you're a black or a person of color, you're just like, yo, white people, what took you 400 years? No, seriously, we're amazed. Like, what? I feel like an anthropologist. I'm like, let me observe these whites. What's happening? Because when we were talking about this, no one cared. Like, people not only did they not care, they were hostile. Like I went to, you and I have gone to Aspen before, right? And Aspen's been very good to us. They're very good people. But I remember I don't know if I shared this with you. Like 2 years ago, they asked me and our mutual friend Julie Offie to just host a conversation for one of their member groups on like Trump and racism in America, right? Like the Islamophobia, the anti-Semitism. And so it was like 80 people. And there was like the Aspen youth crew, which meant like above 40. That's the youth in Aspen. So I'm not even making this. It was an all white crowd. I was the darkest thing in the entire audience. And even their trees are white. It was me in the tree. It was me in the tree.
Even their trees are white. Those Aspen trees are white. They're all
the bears
connected.
Are white.
No, you've gone too far. That's not true. I saw a bear there. It was brown, but it was wearing Gucci. Go ahead.
The bear didn't eat me. He passed me by. He goes, ugh, dark meat. I'm like, come on, bear. Even the bears are racist. Can you imagine being rejected by a hungry bear?
What are you, Indian? Pakistan? What is that?
He's like, I smell turmeric. Get away from me. He goes, ooh, arugula. And then he goes and eats a hipster. So no, that was the room. And, God bless the person who invited me was a young woman who said, I'm inviting you to speak because one of our major funders, like one of our biggest funders is in the room, and she needs to hear this. I had no idea what she meant, but I'm like, okay. So she said, just be honest. And I'm like, I'll be honest. But at the same time, just like you know how you read the room, you read the audience.
Go ahead.
I read the room. This was 2 years ago, and I realized you just can't go into it. You kind of have to sweeten the medicine a little bit, right?
Yep.
So I talked about it. I was blunt. I was honest, but I really held their hand and discussed white fragility and white privilege and how white privilege doesn't mean all white people are bad, and white supremacy doesn't mean really put in the time. And as soon as I said white privilege in the first 2 minutes, the main funder, I lost her. She was upset, passive aggressive with me the entire time, completely lost her. And then we did this breakaway at the end where it was like this, small little dinner, just biting 19th century passive aggressive, Jane Austen cuts at me the entire time. and just all the most passive aggressive Karen and Becky ever, Amy. And then she also said, it's about merit and meritocracy. And don't you think the person who is the most, qualified should get it? And then she said, you should read this book, Hillbilly Elegy. And then she just shut down. And so I remember right after I did that, I guess you could call it performance. No one talked to me. They all talked to Julia. Julia's brilliant, charming, and beautiful. So that makes sense. But
right.
You could tell that they just weren't interested. They shut down. And I got maybe a few people. But now you fast forward 2 years, I think those same people will be like, oh, this thing called racism. So I'm amazed, man. Who knows where we're at? But for a person like me, we're yo, we've been talking about it our entire life, our entire career, at a cost. That's what people don't realize. Because if you're a person of color who talks about this openly at an Aspen or at a corporation or in the media, you get labeled what? Troublesome. Difficult. And the reason
that's changing. And I think that part of that change, you are one of the people. You're absolutely, if there's a list of 10 people in television and in print, really, who has changed the perception or changed the threshold with which a cable news network will allow a conversation. You've done that. I think you shattered a lot of views and glass ceilings and ideas by the way that you spoke so eloquently and bluntly, which is why I am really, as you know, apoplectic that CNN did not renew your contract. And I'm really upset about that at all of the times. And we'll see how this plays out. It's not like CNN or a network has everybody's contract come up at the same time. but it's hard to know who gets their contract renewed. But if you're renewing like old white guys who have made a ton of money and have been there forever and not renewing the guy, one of the guys, Wajahat Ali, who broke so many of those views and with such honesty and raw, brutal truth and facts and analysis, there's something really wrong with these networks. And I'm wondering where you think, taking into consideration your situation, having your contract not be renewed, but, who knows what's behind all of that. But where do you think media is today with hearing from voices of color on issues that are really difficult now more than ever? Race, something you've been talking about bluntly your whole career. Where are we?
Yeah, so we are still on a long uphill journey. And for people to say, Waj, you're just whining, complaining, you're playing the race card, I just say, take a breath, exhale, and look at the data. If you look at the data and the studies across the board that have been done on, say, Hollywood, on theater, on journalism and publishing, it is stunning. It is an overwhelmingly white industry and industries, right? Like publishing is like almost 80% white. And so this is a problem that they have been made aware of. This is not like a new situation. We have been talking about it for years. Remember, even the Oscars, they had that whole bit with Chris Rock when our friend April Rain did the Oscars So White hashtag. But,
right.
It was his entire monologue. The reality is this, and I tweeted this yesterday, and it might offend some people. People always ask me, like, why aren't they more diverse? Like, they should obviously realize this is a problem. The answer is they just don't care. And by they, it's like whoever's in power, the gatekeepers, whiteness, white supremacy, the system and paradigm that upholds white lives above all other lives, right? They just didn't care. Because if they cared, they would have done something. Do you see what I'm saying? Like when someone says, I care, then I say, okay, let me look at your fruits, your labor, your work.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. But based, again, this is only on my anecdotal experience. I think it's not only do they not care, they don't think it's going to make money. They don't think that diversity is marketable. They don't think that it's lucrative. And this is evidence from my experience at both CNN and SiriusXM, but others as well, where they will say, it's not my job to care about diversity, or it's not my job to care about that person's politics. They will bring us a huge audience and we will make money. That's my job. We're a for-profit company at SiriusXM or wherever else. They're not, public. It's not a government agency. It's not Voice of America, and we could talk about that. They care about making money, and they don't think diverse voices are as lucrative, which is arguably a more egregious error, because if the only thing they care about is making money, this is exactly who you tap into and who you showcase.
Well, it's all connected, and you made a very good point, because all the studies show that when there's more diversity, you actually get more money. When there's more diverse casts on TV, those TV shows are more successful. When movies and franchises have more diverse casts, you actually get more revenue. So diversity actually helps the bottom line of all industries, and all industries in America. The color that they worship, this country worships more than anything else, is the color green. But it's a self-reinforcing system, because if all the gatekeepers are white, and all their friends are white, and all the people they promote are white, and all the stories are white-centered, what stories are going to get the ratings and the views and the money?
Exactly.
White stories.
Exactly.
If you literally have not given any meaningful chance to black stories, brown stories, Asian stories, or just stories, honestly, featuring black or brown people, then you look at your audit and you go, wow, we've had 0 movies starring South Asians, which means we have no track record. So prove to me, Wajahat Ali, that a story about, I don't know, Pakistani Americans, but like an American love story starring Pakistanis will make money. Sorry, you can't. This is just a business. And I'm like, have you ever given it a shot? Have you ever invested money?
No, they haven't, because they're not listening when you talk. They're not friends with. And back to your original point, that they don't care. So the final hypothetical I would throw out there to get your reaction to would be, if I am a racist white executive, and I have been, if I think that a black female would make money, I'm going for it. I might go for it because even though I'm racist, I think this black woman can make money. The problem is the racism informs why they don't think that they can, because they just don't have these conversations. They're not curious about it. They don't have people, employees, and friends in their lives that will tell them there's a huge audience over here that will pay for this product. They just don't have those conversations. Going back to an even more earlier point, which I think the problem still is self-segregation.
Well, yeah, I mean, also, I'll tell you what I've been told, and I'm not the only one. I'm sure you've heard this from many of your friends who are black and people of color. It's in every industry, because I've had a very interesting career, right? I wrote a play, I published the play, I write for the New York Times, I've been on TV. Me and Dave Eggers wrote an HBO pilot. I was a practicing attorney. So if you really kind of look at my strange career, I've had a foot in a lot of these industries. And, white supremacy is, again, a system, a paradigm, an ideology that permeates all these industries in the United States of America. I've been told the following so many times: watch, I would love to promote or publish or produce talent of color, but where are they? We just don't know where the good ones are. We have searched so far and wide, but they just don't exist. We only go for the merit. And so, to go to your point, if your entire industry is filled with people who look like you, who come from the same zip codes, who go to the same 3 colleges, who come from the same 3 white ethnic backgrounds, and if you haven't put in the effort or time, or if you don't care, obviously you're not going to search out the massive talent that's there, right? Number one. The massive talent has always been there. We've always been there, and we've always given lists. Like, you see so many now people on social media, people of color sharing this, like list after list. We get asked this every year. Show us where the writers are. Can you provide us a list? And the lists are ignored, and they keep going to their friends, right? And so what you have is this desire to make money, this desire to line up your pockets with the color green. And you're absolutely right that at the end of the day, people want to go they'll if you can get a unicorn on a tricycle and that becomes the thing, you'll have everyone in America we got to make a video game out of this unicorn on a tricycle. Right? That's just how it is. Right. But it becomes a self-serving system. And then when you get the outliers like Black Panther or Crazy Rich Asians, that's exactly how they view it, as an outlier, not the norm. They go, but do I really want to invest in the Crazy Rich Asians sequel? That's a one-off. Or Black Panther was a one-off. But if you look at the numbers, look at Kevin Hart. The man kills. Or Original Kings of Comedy. The producers for Original Kings of Comedy, for those of you who saw it, it's D.L. Hughley, it was Cedric the Entertainer, Bernie Mac, and Steve Harvey. Yep. The producers knew their audience. They realized the system would not help them. So they went and said, F this, we'll just do it independently, and we'll go to black audiences. At that time, this was 20 years ago, it was the highest grossing concert. Oh, right?
And I can speak to the fact that every single comedian, starting with black comedians, they just basically repurposed it, the Kings of New York comedy, but all the white Italian comedians did the Italians of comedy. Women of a certain age, everybody has replicated the success there because you've got a demographic that's going to like that humor, et cetera. Go ahead.
No. And so you see, there's a market, but then what they do is they segregate it. The Hollywood ghettoizes it. It becomes a black show, a brown show. Aziz Ansari did this bit in his show, Master as the Nun, which is so on point. He says, if there's a Friends, and suppose there's 5 white friends, but suppose you replace 2 of the white friends with 2 brown men, it becomes a brown show. White supremacy warps everything, right? Because if white is the template, if white is the mainstream, if white is the neutral, then everything else is what? Outside. It's exotic. It's a condiment, an extra, and it comes in and kind of contaminates the mainstream, and it becomes like a unique side dish. Whereas we're saying we're not a side dish. We've been on the table. We're part of the main course. Right. And so don't look at this as a black show. Look at this as a show which just happens to have black people. So I'll give you a really quick example. We never say in America, that's a white show. That's really white. How will that appeal to the mainstream? You never hear that. But what you really hear from the rest of us is, and I've heard this literally told to me multiple times. I'll give you one quick story. Waj, your first play had a lot of brown characters. For your second novel or your play, can you make sure You put in a white character or two just to make it appeal to the mainstream. I had a literary agent tell me that. That's a true story. And so we're dealing with this. We're dealing with this in 2020 with alleged liberal folks who've traveled the world, who are in gatekeeper positions. It's the money aspect of it, but it's also the white privilege aspect of it and a system of white supremacy. And you have to really investigate your whiteness. So you have to investigate how your white privilege has not only helped you, but benefited all your friends, and how it has excluded so many other people. It takes a lot of work. Not only does it take a lot of work, and this is, I think, the reason why people are so hesitant, and this is my theory, I think deep down, white people get it. But it's like one of those things that if we acknowledge it, we'll have to confront our role in upholding it.
I disagree. I think there's a lot. I think that's the case a lot of times. But I also think there is just an ignorance that travels like a virus through a lot of white America, and the way that it plays out. And you mentioned this earlier with this wealthy woman in Aspen is, I worked for this. Nobody helped me. And so let's play that out. If I were to say to you, listen, Waj, I hear what you're saying. I realize that it's tough for people of color and always has been. But dude, I was born into deep poverty. I had a single mom, and I worked really hard. I got a paper route when I was 8 years old. I've worked all my life. My mom then got sick. I took care of her. Nobody ever handed me anything. So stop being a victim of your life and of your circumstances, and stop making excuses, and stop asking for a handout. I don't want you to tell me how hard your life's been. My life has been hard too. That is the argument that I have heard my entire career talking to white people. How do you answer that guy?
Yeah, that's the white fragility 101. That's a defensive reactionary posturing to when you are told that you, by virtue of your ethnicity or race, might have a leg up on the rest of us, that you might have benefited from a system, a entire paradigm and system that treats white life and white skin as more precious than black skin and brown skin. And so I always tell people, I understand. You are absolutely right. You have struggled, you have worked hard, but at the same time, you are part of a system that does not treat everyone equally. And so just like you've struggled, a black woman has struggled. But the virtue of her being a black woman, all the studies show she will get paid less, she will have less resources, she will have less of a chance at success. When she looks out on the TV, she sees very few heroes who look like her. When she looks at the managers and where she works, if she gets a job, there are very few people who look like her. And as we've seen study after study after study, the darker your skin color gets, the less amount of money you make. And also, I want to add one more when it comes to height, right? So we see a system which has benefited white lives, specifically white men who get paid more money, who have statues erected for them, even when there are traitorous losers who lose a war, right? And so what you are saying is correct, is that you've worked hard. But at the same time, you have benefited from a system that has elevated white people above all else. And so just maybe what you can do, if you want to do it, if you choose to do it, is acknowledge this and maybe just use with that small privilege that you have to lift up another person who's exactly in your boat, grew up poor, had a single parent, had nothing handed to them, but has a boot on their neck which presses down harder just because they're black and brown. And I think if you kind of tell someone that, maybe, let me put it this way, you acknowledge their story, right? You acknowledge their pain, you acknowledge their frustration, because you don't know you don't know anyone's life, you don't know what they've lived through. But at the same time, then you have to pivot, in my opinion, and say, yes, and you have a plus one that we don't have.
Right.
That plus one is your white skin.
If you can, and it's not something to feel guilty about or bad about. It's something that when you recognize it, in my opinion, it's liberating, because you can understand how you might help people who didn't have the same privilege or opportunity. And it also, because there's nuances dead, I am not as privileged as the white kid whose parents went to college. My parents didn't. My mom went to college later in life, but I'm not as privileged as that guy, but I am and I didn't get into this school. I didn't have these different opportunities, but that doesn't mean I'm generally not more privileged than so many other people, including maybe wealthier, more educated black people and wealthier and more educated white women even. I mean, you have to understand generally the way that the system has worked for generations, and you have been so good at explaining that for so long. I'm so excited that it has really started to resonate with a more critical mass that makes it matter. And I wonder where you think we're at based on how long you've been ranting.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned white guilt. I notice I don't talk about that. I'm not interested in white people feeling guilty. It's like, you feel guilty, then you feel shame, then you feel angry. And then it's like, I don't think this guilt helps. And I think this white guilt, which I think was really kind of common, right, in the 90s and even 2000s, like, feel white guilt. It didn't really motivate the type of positive action. What I would much rather want is awareness. I want people just to be aware. And if you're aware, that means your eyes are open and you are able to at least be willing to see, like, how you like we were talking about in the beginning, the analogy where something's existing under your very nose forever, but then it just takes a moment and then you finally notice it.
Yeah.
Like police brutality. Oh, these blacks have been talking about forever. Oh, I get it. And I think we're in that moment where eyes are finally opening, where people are like, I understand. Oh, these people of color aren't just whining and complaining and being victims. Oh, black people are literally being shot and killed just for being black. Oh, people can't even like enjoy their barbecue without a Becky or an Amy coming and like ruining it. Oh, look at the Muslim ban. I mean, that's honestly, as a Muslim, I could tell you what really shifted for a lot of people was the Trump, not just the presidency, but Trump running for office. When Trump started like promoting all these conspiracy theories about Muslims and openly doing the Muslim ban, and then in the first week of office, the first 2 weeks, you remember that was the first policy that Stephen Miller and Bannon tried to push through.
Yeah, it was chaos.
The Muslim ban. That's what I saw a lot, because the people told me, like a friend of mine who's known me since I was like 8 said, "You've been talking about this since we were kids. I finally get it." And so I feel like we're in this moment right now where enough white people are like, I want to understand. And this is where there's an opportunity. We can't do it alone. White people need to do a lot of the work, and white people need to help other white people, because there's only so much I can do. But at the end of the day, if you don't like lead yourself to water, like you'll be thirsty, right? And so if I have to be even more blunt, progress in America, especially when it comes to racial progress, has always coincided with white men being less cruel. And I know that sounds harsh, but it's literally like we're just waiting for white people to become less crazy and less cruel, like over time. And if that sounds harsh, just think about it. It's like white people decide, you know what? We're not going to enslave black people. Like, thank you, white people. And then they're like, you know what? We're not going to segregate. Thank you, white people. You know what? We're going to give women the right to vote. Thank you, white men. You know what? We're going to do the 1965 Immigration Nationality Act that, take away most of these quotas that were put in place in 1924. Thank you, white people. And so if you have power...
But you can't golf at our golf course.
Yeah, of course. Not there yet. But what I'm saying is, if you want me to be really blunt, that's what people of color have waited for white people to catch up and get it. Well, because it's been white people who've been in power. But now you're also seeing more and more folks saying, okay, we can't wait anymore. We're just going to do this shit on our own. But we can't really do it on our own because we're stuck together. It's a multicultural country, and America will sink or swim either together or, we'll go down in flames, man. That's the reality.
I think it's really important. I'm on a panel with all white people basically talking about this, because black folks and people of color, women, whatever the issue is, have done their job. They've done enough. They've been crying out since the beginning. And I think it's more effective if I were as eloquent and as intelligent as you are, and could kind of lace things together the way that you do. It'd be more effective from me than you to other white people. I mean, when it's a person of color that is making the point and is shedding the light and is exposing the truth, it can be written off easier by the ignorant white person.
It is always written off. No, it's always written off.
Then by their white peer telling them this. Like my dad I've been talking about this on the podcast. My dad, Waj, is burning down his friends one after another.
Wow.
And he's almost getting off on it. He loves it. He's finished with their I mean, my dad has had his own struggles and issues and awakening, I think, like a lot of people his age. But I mean, it's been beautiful to see. But it coming from him, a guy their age, their category, their education, their success, etc., is way different than coming from you. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, it colors everything, and I use the term color, it's a double-edged sword.
You don't know our struggle. We don't have white markers. You don't know what it's like. We don't color in white.
There's multiple shades of white. It's exactly what you said, because the messenger also matters sometimes. Not only just the message, but the messenger. Because when it comes to us, I could tell you in the industries that we've always talked about, that we work in, whenever we talk about, this is the reaction. There they go again. Oh, those darkies, always whining and complaining. Or they say, of course they're going to say that. Oh, they're always biased. They're not neutral. They're not objective. Oh, they're always subjective. But when a white guy says it, then they're like, wait a second. Why are you as a white talking about this? You're white. It's assumed that the white person does not have an ulterior motive or does not have a quote unquote agenda. And so I think the tribe, the tribe then says, oh, you're a white who doesn't have an agenda. You don't have literal skin in the game. And yet you're so passionate about this. Let me listen to you with a different frequency, which is just human nature. Let's just keep it real. That's what happens. And so then they go, if this white peer is talking about it, maybe there's something to it, which is why there's only so much work we can do, and we'll keep doing the work. But at the end of the day, if you really want to make these seismic shifts, you need white people to do the work and help other whites. Because coming to the 2020 election, right, a couple of months from now, I said this before, I'll say it again. Like I keep saying, yo, moderate whites, come get your people, right? Like there's only so much I can do. But then you are friends with these people. You're family members, these white men without college degrees. You can speak their language. I can give you so much ammunition, figurative ammunition, but then you got to do something. Like try to peel off a few, because what else can I do? And I think that's why folks like your dad, and your dad's not the only one though. I've seen a lot of people, I've heard stories a lot of people are just dropping friends. Like, we're done with you. We're done. It's done. Finished. Like, you can't use the N-word around me anymore. Oh, you keep using the N-word? I'm done with you until you shape up. And there is something to that. And I think we also have to make peace with the fact that we're not going to go forward with everyone. We're going to leave some people behind.
By the way, one of the final straws for one guy in an email to my dad was, he said he is sick of being ashamed of being white, and he's proud to be white. And my dad said, I am proud that this will be my last email to you because we aren't friends anymore.
Damn.
Yeah.
Damn.
That was good.
No, but you know that your friend, your dad's friend, and this is something we have to concentrate on, in my opinion. Your dad's friend,
ex-friend,
has echoed ex-friend has echoed a sentiment that I think we can't ignore, because it's not like these people are going to disappear. They're going to nurse that grievance because they feel like they always have to feel guilty for simply existing. They have to feel less than. They have to feel ashamed, and that somehow they are a walking embodiment of sin and oppression, right? And who preys upon those feelings of grievance? Radical right-wing groups, which are increasing. And so I am concerned about many of these men and women who are white, who might not outwardly say what your dad's ex-friend said, who nonetheless feel this way, and who comes in and swoops in and says, I will be your Voltron, your destroyer, your avenger. People like Trump. And so this is something we have to really concentrate on. I think this is going to be a big problem moving forward in America, which is what I meant by what I just said, is that not everyone's going to move forward with us.
Well, it's interesting because I wonder what you think of this, and you've been studying these hate groups for a long time, and it's what you just said is really important in reaction to what their emotions that we're talking about drive them to. And it's almost interesting that it's almost like I have no data on this. I don't know what you think. They're less likely to seek out an organization or a hate group online or join one in a more traditional way because they have Trump. They don't need a fringe group. He's embodying their grievances perfectly fine. Like the president of the United States is a white supremacist and the leader of white supremacists. You don't need to go to the dark web.
You're absolutely correct. You don't need to go to the dark web because the dark web
or a Klan meeting in a barn somewhere.
It's in the White House, and people say, "Well, that's an exaggeration." And I always remind people that Donald Trump's advisor is Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is an open white supremacist. A story that should be just echoed every day until 2020 is the Southern Poverty Law Center shared all the email correspondences between Stephen Miller and that ex-white nationalist who was a Breitbart reporter. She says literally, I was a white nationalist. And she said Stephen Miller is a white nationalist. And literally, if you look at the emails, he is promoting white nationalist literature and talking points and feeding it to Breitbart. So you literally have a white nationalist in the White House. You see the mainstreaming of once fringe white supremacist conspiracy theories, such as the replacement theory and George Soros controlling everything. And George Soros is code word for Jews. Right? You saw the midterm election in 2018 where Donald Trump said invasion.
Yep. The caravan.
You see him.
Yep.
You just saw last week that Katie Hopkins got barred from Twitter. Katie Hopkins is an extremist who has been retweeted and promoted by Donald Trump. She's gone against migrants. She's promoted anti-Semitism. She pals around with white supremacists, and she calls for a final solution on Muslims. This is the woman who Donald Trump, the president of the United States, has retweeted multiple times. And so you're absolutely right, is that what was once fringe is now mainstream and is part and parcel of the Republican Party platform. So just think about where we're going to be moving forward. And this is what I try to warn people about. I don't try to be negative. I just, you've been studying this long enough that I have. You unfortunately see the connections and the dots, which sucks, but you see it much more clearly. It's not because I'm smart, it's because I've spent so much time with it. Is this Republican Party is going to further radicalize. They're not going to go mainstream. It's going to get worse.
Well,
and
yeah.
And when it comes to your dad's ex-friends, I hope he can heal, but some of these people are going to double down.
Oh,
and
yeah.
for them, it's a zero-sum game. It's a zero-sum game. It's survival.
Well, I think to all of the points that you were making regarding the president, I wanted to ask you, hopefully you've seen this. I asked Jason Johnson this question as well. The video that the president retweeted of a black man beating up a white man in a department store, that is classic propaganda. Taking any time you have a story or a video, it's not, by the way, there are a ton of black people, women, Indians, and Pakistanis who are assholes. They're just assholes. They're people who do bad things. They're people who beat people up. Fine. But you don't let those acts of an individual generalize about an entire group, and we could separate that from, by the way, police officers who choose that job. They're not a race, not an immutable characteristic, and so on. But the video of a black man beating up a white man, that is classic propaganda to get white people terrified and fired up and scream, look at this, they're killing us, they're beating us up in Macy's. What about his sharing of that video?
That was deliberate. That was deliberate race baiting. And Tucker Carlson openly has said it, right? That they're going to come after you. Who's they and who's you? Basically, it's the same old fear that comes back to white supremacy. It just every time there's racial progress. I look at Birth of a Nation, the 1915 movie, which was the blockbuster of its age, which was, premiered at, the White House, right? Woodrow Wilson, the president, showed it. It talked about when blacks in the South were given freedom and were emancipated, what was the number one fear in that movie, which, by the way, helped re-galvanize the KKK in America. It just shows you the power of pop culture. That movie literally showed that all the blacks, as soon as they got some equality, guess what they did? They took over. They took over the state houses, and they tried to come after the white women. It's that same fear, right? And so now Trump, realizing that his Tulsa rally was a total dud, Brad Parscale got outplayed by friggin' teens on TikTok, and so he goes back to his great assist, which is racism. And on the day that a white supremacist soldier in the army was arrested for trying to plot a terror attack against his own soldiers. This should have been leading news, by the way. This came out yesterday. So the outlets picked it up. But on that day, we were waiting for Trump to see if he would tweet anything about, the tough on crime president talking about this white supremacist soldier in our army plotting with white supremacists to kill fellow soldiers. He instead tweets out a video of a black man beating up a white man in a Nordstrom and saying, "Where are the protests?" This is a quote unquote signal. It's not even a dog whistle. It's like a megaphone to his base that look at these blacks, look at these people of color. Right now, they're taking down statues, but guess what they're going to take down next? You. And they're going to replace you. And what's the number one conspiracy theory of white supremacists? The replacement theory, which says that Jews are using blacks and browns and immigrants to weaken and take over Western, code word white, civilization. It cannot be more clear. And yet still in 2020, many of my colleagues refuse to call Trump a racist. This just happened last night. That's why I just want people to connect the dots. Where do you think this is going to go? If the President of the United States, during international protests over police brutality against black and brown bodies, this is what he tweets. Where do you think this is going to go?
And the other thing he tweets, and by the way, that everybody should know about that story. You're so right. You've been tweeting a lot about it. U.S. Army soldier charged in neo-Nazi plot to attack fellow troops.
Yep.
Should be a massive story, and the president should, if he's going to denounce things every day and talk, every day about things, we're going to have a president like that. He should obviously be talking about this guy, but he is also, I think this is no small thing and no small signal, defending Andrew Jackson, and always has. Andrew Jackson has always been a hero of his. I think he put a picture up of him. Andrew Jackson, one of the most brutal American presidents we have ever had, and of course, the guy who is going to be replaced on a $20 bill by none other than Harriet Tubman. Finally have a woman, much less a woman of color, on our currency. And, of course, they sidelined that plan that took place under Obama because they had to reverse everything the Obama administration did. He is defending Andrew Jackson as loud as he can and the statue of Andrew Jackson and threatening, don't you ever take down that Andrew Jackson statue. You got to go to jail a very long time. Andrew Jackson was a great man. Andrew Jackson, not a great man.
He was trending yesterday. So the same day in which we found out there was a terrorist in the U.S. Army who tried to plot an attack on his own soldiers, a white supremacist, Andrew Jackson was trending because Trump and his base were more upset about an Andrew Jackson statue being pulled down by people than, I guess, I don't know, a terrorist who's going to kill U.S. soldiers, right? And Andrew Jackson was literally one of the worst presidents in this country, right? He was a war criminal. He was a slaver. He was cruel. And he presided over the systematic decimation of indigenous Americans. So I don't shed a single tear over any and all Andrew Jackson statues being torn down in this country. And it just goes to show you their deep fear, this deep fear of racial anxiety, which was a primary, not the only motivator for Trump voters, according to all the studies, of replacement, right? Because like you said, who's replacing Andrew Jackson on the bill? Harriet Tubman.
Yeah.
And so they're seeing their white heroes. And this country has gone above and beyond. Historians have done so many mental gymnastics to romanticize Andrew Jackson, literally glossing over his entire career of just being just the worst, most brutal, like just racist, right? With this deep disdain for black people and indigenous Americans. I mean, he just decimated them. This is the man that we had on our $20 bill, which shows you everything about white supremacy. The fact that we're like, well, why is this man celebrated? The fact that Trump and Miller and all these people praise Andrew Jackson. And if you remember, when Trump was awarding the Navajo code breakers, remember that? I think it was 2 years ago.
Yes, I do. It was disgraceful.
Okay, do you remember? And go back, if you guys, whoever's listening to this, just go back and see that video, that footage of Trump awarding these heroes, these war heroes who are these Navajo code breakers. He decided to give them the medal in front of a giant portrait of Andrew Jackson. That was very deliberate.
And his comments were also insensitive. I forget what they were, but they were. Oh, he mentioned he made fun of Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah.
Called her Pocahontas in front of those.
Yeah, and the warriors, the Navajo codebreakers. Right?
It's
this is all, and all this. People say, "Oh, it's just an accident." This is very deliberate. Even when he went to Michigan, I think it was 2 months ago, and he praised Henry Ford. He talked about Henry Ford's bloodline. Henry Ford helped mainstream the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory of the Protocols of Elders of Zion in the United States of America. He was a flaming anti-Semite. And so the bloodline, that language, is used by Nazis, right, to talk about, and like white supremacists, to talk about the purity of the white bloodline. So why did Trump, of all the words and phrases you could use, praise the quote-unquote bloodline of Henry Ford? It was like the most odd, weird statement that he decided to make in his speech. Is it odd or is it deliberate? And so this is again a problem. We talked about this. An enduring problem in America is the inability of our country to talk about racism, to acknowledge racism, to really confront racism. Like literally people would punch themselves in the face instead of talk about white supremacy. And that's why I feel like this moment that we're in the last 3 weeks, and call me cynical, I don't know how long this moment will last. So it's one of the situations where you're like, we have to do as much as we can with this small little door opening, because that door is probably going to shut. Now, maybe we can pry the door wide open. Maybe we could keep it slightly ajar and open. But, again, being a cynic, maybe the door is going to shut. How many people can we get through to, right? Like how many people can come through the door with us and enter the next phase? Because I know for a fact that people treat white supremacy as Voldemort. Like we just met, like if we talk about it, we freak out. So
right.
The more we talk about it, like look how many examples. Like you and I, for those who are listening, Pete and I just pick up the phone and start talking. We don't do any pre-notes. You don't share anything with me, right? We just talk. This is just you and me off the bat riffing. And look how many examples we're able to just riff off of one thread.
Well, it's constant. It's a constant thread. If you know where to look and you're open to it, it's unfortunately constant. Yeah. All right, man. I appreciate all your time today, buddy. I always love talking to you, and everybody always loves when we talk and to hear from you. And I want everybody to make sure they're following you and hearing from you everywhere. And they should, by the way, everybody should demand that CNN renew your contract. I know you're not leading that charge, but I will, because I think it's preposterous that there's like one Muslim voice and they're not renewing that contract. It's so glaringly obvious how much demand there is for voices like yours. The idea that it wouldn't be renewed is unconscionable, sir. Thank you very much for joining me. Always appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. As always, appreciate the time. Thanks for hosting these conversations.
Talk to you soon.
Later, Ben.
All right. Wajahat Ali on Twitter. Give him a follow. Tell him you heard him here, and I appreciate that very much. If you do, whenever you do, all of those of you who do. All right. Finally, today, we had a conversation. It was just me. It was just me and Maura Quint, and she is one of my favorite follows on Twitter. All three of today's guests are in my top 10 follows on Twitter. Dr. Jason Johnson, Wajahat Ali, and Maura Quint, who on Twitter is @BehindYourBack. She's also the executive director of an awesome organization called Tax March. When I first launched the podcast, I had no idea what I was doing, and I was going to do it 3 days a week and try to have a rotating co-hosts. And I was thinking of J.L. Covan and Maura Quint to be two of those rotating co-hosts, and I kicked it off. I think episode 1, I had Maura on, and she's just so great. I decided not to do the co-host thing and just to do these guest interviews that I've been doing, and who knows how the podcast changes as it continues and as it evolves and as more of you support it with paid subscriptions so that I can try new things and go out on location and bring different people in and pay different people to do different things, as well as really launch the YouTube page in full and do all the video. There's all kinds of ideas that I have. I'm also renovating my studio and going to put it in my shed. And I mentioned that yesterday, and some of you offered your help and expertise. Thank you very much for that. All right. So here's my conversation right now with the great Maura Quint, and I hope you like it. I think you will. Into it. She is, Maura Quint. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. Always love to talk to you. Very excited to have you.
Love talking to you.
All right. So lots to talk about, obviously, in the world. You're based out of Pennsylvania. You've seen, you guys have seen to, I guess, flatten the curve of coronavirus. It seems weird how we go through these things and we reference them in terms of how it's playing out in our locality, how much coverage the news gives it. But if you look at that chart, it's skyrocketing in these states like Arizona and Texas. And the media coverage of it's different. Maybe the spreading of it's different. What do you make of the way it continues and the way that we think about it based on how or where we live?
I think it's ridiculous because, I don't know. No one's built like moats between states from what I can tell. Like you can still pretty easily go from place to place, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't traveled in a while. Maybe they have. I don't know. Maybe that's what they've been up to while they weren't doing anything else to help us. But like, it's kind of dumb. If you can get on a plane, then it's everywhere. Like, what are we talking about? If it's bad in California, it's bad wherever you are. Like, it's going to hit there. All it is whether or not you're in the middle of it, you're in like, a momentary decline, a momentary upswing. Like, it's all the fucking same.
It seems like obviously the president has done an absolutely, like, if you're a comedy writer, like if you were writing jokes about his inability to handle it or ignore it, you wouldn't go this far. You wouldn't go this far. You wouldn't say things like, we wouldn't be seeing so many cases if we didn't have so many tests. I mean,
it's ridiculous. Like, it's insane. He pushes the bounds of believability every single day. Like, it's really unfair. And also, I mean, like, I kind of feel bad for all the comedy writers who did get turned away because they were being too hack for like years and years. They were being told like, no, this is stupid. You can't do that. All along, they were just like super prescient. Who knew? That was like, we should have just let them go with it. Maybe we would have been a little more forewarned.
But it just doesn't seem possible that someone would be so uninterested and so uncaring about trying to fight this pandemic. I mean, he's got everything to gain really by handling this in a way that the experts surrounding him tell him to, but he's not. He's not doing any of it. And, he's in a war with the states.
The whole kill off your electorate thing seems just like unwise going into an election. Like, if you're just trying to see how many of your own people will die, like, I don't know, that feels like that's not going to work out as a winning strategy. But, I'm not a DC consultant, so what the fuck do I know?
What did you think of, you should be, what did you think of the, as I call it, Coronapalooza, as others have called it first, in Tulsa, in Oklahoma? What did you make of that? And he's apparently going to Arizona, another state where coronavirus, one of three. It's only the three that it's skyrocketing, and he's visiting them. What did you make of Tulsa, and what do you think of him now going to Arizona? Well,
I mean, first of all, it was absolutely fantastic. The whole like TikTok teens and K-pop completely
Did that really do it? Was that really the thing? I haven't researched it.
What everyone is claiming. I mean, they really did like go all in to like reserve tickets and completely screwed up the metrics. So they were obviously successful because the campaign was not expecting this, and now Brad Parscale is stepping down.
Is he for sure? Is that confirmed, or is that still a rumor? I saw it from.
I mean, I don't know. I didn't like go call him up or anything.
I'd love for you to. That'd be really good conversation.
If anybody out there has his number, please, I would be so happy to just give a little dial there, just a little chit-chat.
By the way, if Trump's campaign manager, who arguably really helped him get elected for any number of different reasons, I guess they had established a ground game in 2016 that surprised folks. But I mean, can he? One question I was talking with my political friend, smart political DC insider friends today about was, can he recalibrate? Is that a fun question for you to try to examine? If he loses Brad Parscale, who's been in charge of his campaign at this point in the campaign, can he change anything?
Well, I mean, he can do whatever the fuck he wants, really, but he's not going to. I mean, his path is just like pure ego driven, and so that's what it's going to remain. The question is just whether or not there are enough people who want to see their taxes lowered, basically. Like, it's really, that's most of what it's hinging on. That and then, like, abortion. But, like, at this point, I don't even think it necessarily has all that much to do with him, other than believing that, yes, he will fight against abortion, and yes, he will lower rich people's taxes. And at this point, it looks like he probably will do both those things.
Well, yeah. So you're saying it almost doesn't matter what he does. He's not a traditional, candidate. He doesn't care about the minutia of campaigning and having the ground game and having people in every state and having emails and the advertisements and how the money is spent. All the things that you generally have to do. He just doesn't. He doesn't really, it all rests with him, his rallies, his speeches, his interviews, his Twitter timeline. And yet you have to wonder if that's enough. And you're saying, yeah, it is for the people that support him. They don't need him to do anything. They've already made up their mind. But what about all of these, other pro-Biden PACs and these Republicans against Trump and the Lincoln, whatever those guys, the former Republicans, Rick Wilson.
Yeah, Lincoln Project.
Yeah, Lincoln Project. Like, are they hurting Trump and helping Biden? I mean, you think there's anybody that changes their mind a great deal between now and November?
I think that Trump's biggest weapon right now is just voter suppression. And that can take so many different forms, like just keeping people from getting to the polls, which, they're doing. They're shutting polls. That makes it pretty easy, right? Like, if there's no way to get there, then, hey, you have a bunch of people who aren't going to fucking try and get, 50 miles to get somewhere else. I do think that they'll try some big October surprise thing just to disenfranchise people and keep everyone down. And they'll probably do that with some success. They're pretty good at pulling off like attention when they want it towards something. So that will probably, they'll do those things fairly well. So the question is really just, is that going to be enough? But I don't think anything else really matters. It doesn't really matter what he says. It doesn't really, like, all that other stuff. It's like people are kind of there. They're basically to one side or another at this point.
I guess I disagree a little bit in terms of it doesn't matter what he says, because he strategizes like right now he is laying the groundwork for there to be fraudulent election, specifically about voter by mail. He's saying every day he creates these fairy tales which lay a foundation so then he can actually say, see, I told you they were going to do this. I told you they were going to cheat. They were going to rig the election against me. And he's been tweeting a lot about that, even though he in the past has voted himself by mail. And so has everybody that worked in his administration. And it's not a controversial thing where it happens.
When I said it doesn't matter what he says, I mean, like, he's not going to win anyone on a policy here or there. Like, he's not, that's really more what I meant. But yeah, absolutely. He's definitely trying to set it up that, like, this is not going to be something that we can believe in no matter what it turns out to be, because of the expectation that he probably or might lose. The other thing I think that the one thing I think he may be doing is, we've had one round of relief and we had that $1,200 assistance that went to some people via the CARES Act. And the GOP now has completely held up an additional relief going through. And they have really pushed back against this idea of additional relief going. And lately he's been sort of like throwing out this, we're going to put through some bipartisan relief. And I could see like a really late extra payment going out to people as a form of, like, in the same way he held up the $1,200 just because when I put his name on checks. Like, I can see that sort of last minute attempt as a buy, which, may have some effect if he can get it through. Of course, everyone should really just be absolutely furious that they haven't been doing anything to help people all along. But, instead they might be going with this sort of as an electoral tactic. Yeah,
that's interesting. I hadn't heard that. Anybody speculate about that? And that's something we should be on the lookout for.
I haven't either. That's just my own.
That's a good one.
There.
Well, you're always thinking about that as far as, in terms of all things tax March, too. I mean,
that's true.
Yeah. You're, by the way, what are you guys up to? Anything? I mean, it's been really difficult for all these different kinds of nonprofit organizations, activist organizations like yourself during the pandemic to organize, to do, as we talked last time, to get that bus out there that was so effective. It created awareness around the rigged tax system in our country. What's new? Anything? You guys have any campaigns I should be asking about? I should be prepared. I suck.
It's okay. There's really not.
You're one of those people when I talk to, I'm like, I shouldn't ever be unprepared, but it's always going to be a thoughtful, fun, awesome conversation. But I should have known this one. Tax March.
There was nothing there for you to necessarily find. We've been like just sort of banging the drum, and we've also been trying to like kind of take a backseat a little bit to our campaigns and instead just be boosting a lot of the work that racial justice groups have been doing lately, and boosting the work in terms of economic justice as a racial justice issue. Because when we talk about a fair tax code and we look at who's most affected negatively by it right now, we are talking specifically about Black communities. So we've just been trying to really put a spotlight on that lately. But since you mentioned the Trump going to Arizona, we also have had a little bit of a look here at Martha McSally in Arizona, who she came out with a great new plan for relief. She fought the $1,200 going out to everybody.
She's the senator, one of the two senators from Arizona. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's right. She fought extended unemployment insurance. She fought anything that would actually help people. And now what she has proposed is the TRIP Act, where she gives a $4,000 tax credit to individuals, but only those who are paying $4,000 in taxes. She gives a $4,000 tax credit that has to be spent on travel, at least I think 50 miles from one's home, to encourage people to reinvest in travel industry and revitalize that. Basically, she just wants rich people to spread the virus. Like, that's what this is. It's just like, let me pay you to just be a super spreader. Like, go.
I don't understand. What is travel? Is
insane.
I thought you were going to say travel to Arizona. If you come to Arizona and spend your money here, it doesn't seem like it has anything relative to Arizona or being the senator from Arizona. And who the hell thought up that policy in a weird meeting or think tank?
So ridiculous. It's the most absurd thing that I've seen from her in a while. I mean, like, for the most part, she's just like kind of straight down the line, just terrible, just like on board with all the worst of them. Like, yeah, I hate being helpful or good in any way too. But like, this is like going that extra step to just be like, how can I be completely absurd as well as fuck?
I would maybe temper it, like how I hate being helpful or good to the vast majority of people, because she certainly is helpful and good to a very small percentage of people. That's the problem, that media divides us so much, and words and language divide us so much. But really, there is a culture war or a class war, and the class war is really, like, I hate to say it because it's so played out and cliche, but it really is like 99% of us versus 1%, or at least 90% of Americans or income earners versus 10%. It's that stark, and the Republican Party is constantly catering to the very, very wealthy, the very small percentage. And I guess that's how I see us being most divided, even though most people don't look at it that way. It's not as sexy as race or gender or anything else.
I don't know. I think guillotines are incredibly sexy, so I'm not sure what you're talking about. I think that's fully right. That is exactly the biggest divide between us. The problem is, the double problem is, one, Republicans do a good job then of like making that their actual priority, but speaking to sort of cultural issues and pretending that's their priority, masking it in the culture. Right. That's one problem. And then the second problem is that, unfortunately, the Democrats aren't a reliable 99% ally either. Right. Like, they're better. They're definitely better. But unfortunately, they swing a lot of stuff to the wealthy as well. So it's, the us versus them. Unfortunately, a lot of politicians are the them.
Do you see that changing with the progressive movement?
I think it's certainly something that the progressive movement seems to care about and is focused on. There's a lot of attention being paid to like who people are taking money from when they're running these campaigns. And that's a big stepping stone for all of this. So, I think there's some definite potential there. But, we need such massive, massive changes that like it's hard because, partially it's like, well, that's a tiny drop of water in a bucket. And at the same time, yay, a drop of water. We need it.
By the way, I thought of you yesterday when I got a telephone call from a candidate, someone phone banking for this candidate. I live in New York, 23, need a low-east seat, and there's 7 Democrats. I was actually thinking about running for the seat for like 2 completely stoned weeks. I mean, that never would have been a good idea. Thank God my wife convinced me not to, because the people that are running are really well qualified. But 2 in particular that I really like, and Mondaire Jones is who I ended up supporting. I like the guy a lot. But one guy that's running, Maura, is the son of a billionaire. And he spent like $2.7 million of his own money, his dad's money, on his campaign. So this woman calls yesterday, and she said she was phone banking for him, Adam Schleifer or something like that. And I said, it's not okay that this guy is funded by his dad, who's a billionaire, and spending his own money on his campaign. That's not democracy. That's not good for the health of democracy. And progressives generally support public financing of campaigns, not self-financing. And how can you not understand that? And the lady, to her credit, engaged me. And she said the fact that he is financing his own campaign means he doesn't have to answer to any special interests. And Maura, I got nervous and came up empty. Me, who does this for a living. What is the best answer to someone who says, I'm a rich person, I'm funding my own campaign, therefore I'm not influenced by any of these special interests. Nobody can get to me because you can't buy me off because I already have all the money I need.
Yeah, the problem is they're beholden then to their own interests, and their own interests are making themselves more rich. I mean, that was Trump's argument, too, or the supporters of Trump, like, hey, he's rich. You don't have to worry. It's not lobbyists that he's turning to. And then there he is in office, and it turns out, he has all the same priorities as those lobbyists. I mean, like, it's not great. The rich are prioritizing themselves. So if they are funding themselves, they are going to continue with the policies that best benefit them, the rich people. Like it's no good. It doesn't really matter if it comes from the rich dad, the rich neighbor, or me, myself, who am rich. Like all of your plans and what benefits you are the same thing.
Let me change gears and ask you about the Black Lives Matter movement and your thoughts on things, because you have been really on social media at Behind Your Back, by the way. Follow Maura. She's one of the best people on Twitter, period. You've been railing against police. You are what did the police do to you? Where did the police touch you?
I've gotten angrier and angrier. It's true. I know plenty of people who are police officers, and I have known people who have been involved with the police department in various ways. And I definitely, well, I mean, look, I lost faith in the police as an institution a long time ago, but I was still and am still a white woman who is therefore walks around not with a tremendous amount of fear of the police stopping me or harassing me. And that said, it's just become so stark and so clear that the institution as a whole is just fundamentally broken. And it's not necessarily that I think that like police officers are just like all the most evil people and they're just like, some sort of terrible, what was the anti-G Cobra? I don't know. Anyway,
Cobra yeah. Commander, Destro.
Cobra Commander. That's where I was going with that.
Well, they're more. I mean, the fictional character they compare themselves to, honestly, and I think this is the problem, is the Punisher.
Yeah, it is the problem, and it's a fundamental problem of the way that we have our police departments set up right now. Like the way what we are giving money to police departments and then asking police departments to do is absurd. And so I'm really on board with defund the police, primarily because I think we have expected or chosen to have the police do too many things. Like they're doing too many jobs. They should not be doing nearly any of these. I mean, there was like a dumb tweet. I don't even remember. Some Republican the other day put a picture of a bear walking through town and was like, all those people talking about defunding the police. What do they think? They're going to call a social worker to deal with this? Like
the bear?
The bear. Like he couldn't conceive of anyone to call but a police officer to deal with a bear.
Listen, by the way, if you live in the kind of town that has bears, you've got plenty of people who've got shotguns, is what I'm saying. But
it's usually not an issue. But like he was just absolutely snowballed on Twitter by people being like, do you know that there's an animal control? Like there's an entire department that deals with this. But like so many people's mindset is just full on like, oh, there's anything, I'm going to throw the police at it, which is just not ever what should have happened. And so we need to like pull that way, way back. It seems to me that primarily what we look for the police to do is act as a detective. Like that's what we mostly like. We call police the majority of times after the crime has already happened. And then like, listen to them say, well, I don't know if there's anything we can do, but we give you a call if we find anything. Like that's what the police do for many, many people if they're actually being useful. And I don't think we need to be giving millions and millions of dollars to police departments and then like handing them tanks and then, militarizing them and telling them that the world is terrible and they should just, shoot first.
And the people they're policing are their enemies.
That's right.
Instead of their neighbors.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's all gone completely like we need to scrap it, start over. The system isn't working. Looking
at your Twitter timeline and seeing at least 2 tweets that I didn't know about and that are just outrageous. I mean, and these are, and I pay pretty close attention, and these are a couple, headlines I didn't see, but NYPD commissioner says officers who drove into crowd protesters did not violate use of force policy. And it's like, well, I'm not a law enforcement expert, and I'm sure somebody would try to explain how that is in some way lawful or effective or whatever. But good God, may their souls be saved for their defense of cars running into protesters. We saw those videos. That was one. I also saw this tweet of yours from the ProPublica investigation. My family saw a police car hit a kid on Halloween. Then I learned how NYPD impunity works. And just talking about public accountability or lack thereof of police departments across this country, that needs to change right away. And it seems like there might be some movement on it. What do you think? Anything real happening?
Definitely. Yeah, there is actually. There was recently some polling as of last week that I saw. A Navigator survey. They do like weekly pollings on various topics, and they have been sort of tracking support of Black Lives Matter, tracking support of defunding the police, and they're seeing support on these things sort of consistently rise. The more people are seeing with their very eyes, like, we're watching video of this stuff nonstop, and I think people are starting to recognize that there is something wrong here and something that needs to change. And now a majority of people polled are saying that they support the goals of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is, that alone is something like to be heartened by a bit. I think it's not going away. I think this is something that we're actually going to pay attention to, at least for a little while. I mean, nationally, we have a pretty short attention span. We're basically toddlers, but, still, this one seems to be sticking a little more. Yeah.
You also tweeted about that whole Shake Shack situation, which was so crazy. What a crazy and important story in terms of being a narrative for how our media works.
It's amazing. I mean,
most people will never know that was a fraudulent story, and there was nothing remotely close to cops being poisoned. The machine had cleaning fluid in it, and they didn't get sick, even though the head of the union said they were thrown up. Nobody was throwing up, but they said they did, and all the news outlets reported that they did.
Right. And that's also when you look at that, then you also have to dive into news outlets being defunded and who's covering the news and where are they getting it from. You have very few people doing this. And they were looking at in a small town as well, having access to that when you have one or two. I mean, this wasn't a small town, but they were looking at other cities, and you have one or two people who are on that beat. They just take what the police departments are putting out. They don't have a lot of space to question that without completely losing any sort of access to getting any sort of information on investigation. So it all ties together. It's all of our systems are broken and they are hurting one another. So it's really fun right now.
You quoted that tweet. Just a reminder about the Shake Shack police scandal lie. You're just a reminder they lie about everything all the time, even about getting themselves a damn snack. They did. I read the whole story more. They ordered 3 shakes to be picked up. One was cherry, one was vanilla. And I'm like, why do I know their shake order?
I know. I was like, well, isn't that nice? It was a diverse shake order, is I think what we were supposed to take away from that. Yeah. All shakes. How do
you feel about a cherry shake? I thought that was a weird one.
I think that I didn't know that there was cherry shakes. I was kind of shocked to find out.
What's your shake order?
I'm not a shake person.
This is no fun, then. This is no fun. Vanilla. I had a feeling you were going to say.
How boring is that? Vanilla.
You're just not a dairy person. You're not a dairy person.
I love ice cream. I love ice cream, and to me, a shake is just you took ice cream and made it worse a little bit.
Interesting. I'm just the opposite. I don't love ice cream, which has always made me some kind of a horrible person. And part of the reason I don't like ice cream is because I don't like the act of eating it. It's cold, and you got to dig a spoon into it. It can be burdensome. I don't like eating to be burdensome, and a milkshake makes it so simple.
You are so ready to be like a senior citizen, like just like feed
Yep.
you like mushed up food, or a baby, I suppose, one or the other. Like I don't know what your fetish is, pick one. But like...
You're making me choose. I think baby. I think I want to be a baby again. I think probably more likely that I don't have to know all these things. That was fun.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Isn't it interesting when your kids? How old are your kids?
They're 6 and 8.
Yeah, so you're right in the thick of them finding out like what life is.
Oh yeah.
My girls
Oh, my
are just kind of figuring stuff out. Dude, my daughter had her first babysitting gig, and she was like, "It was so hard." I was like, "Oh, was it? Your babysitting was tough."
That you just like brought back a whole. First of all, how old is your daughter?
This one is almost 13. Both my daughters are babysitting right now.
And how many kids? Like, how old were the kids?
They're 2 kids that are 5 and 7. They're awesome. They're great kids.
That's a lot, though. Yeah.
But like my daughter's just not used to like a kid saying no or not being, and she's used to her dolls.
One of my first babysitting gigs was a family that friend of a parent friend and stuff.
Yep.
And they had 2 little kids. Like one was like 2 or 3, still in a high chair, and the other was like I want to say 5 or 6. And I was trying to like feed the baby, and the 5 or 6-year-old wanted to play like cops and robbers. That's what he wanted to play. And I was the robber. And so he kept like running around with a little fake toy gun, and he was like running and like shooting after me. And I had to like duck while I'm feeding the crying baby who's screaming the whole time, just screaming, just would not like shut up for a second, just spitting the food at me, like very like all the ridiculous stuff. And I'm distracted and I'm trying to do that. And the older one is like, "All right, well, you're going to jail now. You're under arrest," and came up to me and put a handcuff on me and handcuff on the door, which I assumed, of course, were like a kid's handcuffs. I don't know what the parents were into, but they were not kids' handcuffs. They were real handcuffs, and he put it on super tight. And I just like realized that I was officially handcuffed to a door by like a 6-year-old.
Oh my God! Did we?
And
were you able to get out? I mean, did he unlock it? Did the parents come home? Did the kid get fed?
Calm, and I was just like, "Hey, that's fun. All right, well, why don't you let me out? We'll play again." And he goes, "No, there's no key. You just wriggle your hand out. That's what I do when my dad does it to me." I'm sure his dad makes it real loose. He had put it on me. It was like cutting off circulation. And I'm like, "Really? No key? Okay."
Oh my God! Well, now you've just let us into something that you're definitely not into as an adult. I can't imagine a potential partner pulling out cuffs. You're like, no.
This is why I hate the cops. This is it. It started right here.
Yeah, better joke. Okay, so speaking of jokes, have you been paying attention? You've been following what's going on in comedy world with comedian Chris D'Elia and others?
Yeah, a little bit there. Not great.
Not great, no. And, the insinuations or the accusations against him, as well as a number of other comedians now, are that they coaxed underage women into having sex with them, sexual relations of some sort. And, I know this is something that happens. I guess I certainly didn't or don't know guys who are doing it with like underage women. But comedy has always been, for a lot of guys, a primary vehicle to get laid, to get sex, to get women. And it's certainly never was for me. I think partly because I was talking about this already, but I talked a lot about my wife and daughters, and that's not in my act. That's not usually something women go for. But anyway,
it depends on the woman, but yeah.
And I always hear that too. I was like, none of them, according to me, in my experience. But like the other thing about it was that we're seeing it now be carried into comedians talking and bragging about doing these kinds of things, and other comedians on the podcast or the shows, whatever, laughing at them. How would you describe kind of this development as it pertains to comedians in the culture in a wider way? How would you describe what's happening? How do you feel about it?
Well, I mean, I think that, misogyny is everywhere, right? Like there's not a world, to my knowledge, that it doesn't exist. Maybe there is a fantastic lesbian bookstore where like everything, there's no I don't know, but even then, probably not. And it certainly exists in comedy, and it certainly has been for certain groups and certain sectors of comedy, like celebrated as like, this is funny. It's funny to be as misogynist as possible. That's going to get a laugh. So no surprise. Like that's something that was elevated for a really long time, and something that people took pride in doing, right? Like they could make the most obnoxious joke in that way. So I don't know. I mean, like, unfortunately, I don't think any of the spotlight is going to change much for right now in that world. Like, I think there's still too many people who have been using comedy as a mask for whatever their particular brand of hate is for a really long time. And there are a lot of people who are also using comedy to enjoy their own particular brand of hate, whatever that may be. So they have an audience. And it only really matters if you're trying to like broaden it and appeal to a larger group. And that might be a problem, but there's still going to be an audience for it. There's still going to be, these assholes making asshole jokes and getting off on it, like whatever, I mean, that's not me accepting it either. I just don't think we've hit the tipping point where we're going to have a vast cultural change in comedy just yet. I mean, we've been through this already. Like Louis C.K. is out there performing on a regular basis still. Like,
what do you think of that? What do you think of people? He's a perfect example of a guy who's come back, and he's got audiences paying for him. You can't cancel him, I guess, unless you boycotted the venues that are hosting him, and nobody seems to really be doing that in any effective way.
Yeah, I mean, what does it mean to cancel, right? Like, it's an individual choice ultimately. So, it means reaching a tipping point of enough people making that individual choice, or enough people that seem to be making it that are going to influence like a business or a company working with that individual. And it's just not there yet. But I think that there's a lot of benefit in like pointing these things out and seeing, putting the sunlight on it as much as possible. Yeah. And I think the other thing too, in general in comedy, like I think that, one of the other ways to really fight back against this is to uplift comedians, whether they be women, non-gender, transgender, like whatever they're, but if you uplift and even for that matter, straight cisgendered men, but who are not engaging in that sort of misogyny, I think the more that we uplift the other comics, and there are tons, I think there are vastly more of them than there are of the like strains of hate comedy. I think the better off we are. So
hate comedy. I like that, or hate that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's those are both really good points, or all really good points. And there are a lot of comedians, including, straight white guys who do a really good job at coming out with original stuff, making fun of all of it. Ted Alexandro, Patton Oswalt, Christian Finnegan, just to name three off the top of my head. What about cancel culture? What does that phrase mean to you, Maura? I really am interested in your answer on when you hear that, how do you, you're loading your clip. I'm watching you.
Well, I think it's, it's a buzzword, right? Like it's a catchphrase. We're just using it to kind of try and explain some people facing some consequences for some of their actions, but it is still so like the word itself is so big for what it actually has meant. Like we're canceling it. It's no longer going to exist. That show is taken off the air. We're striking it from the record. Like that's not happening. It's just not happening. Cancel culture just seems to mean, hey, a bunch of people are talking about how this sucks and I don't want to support that anymore. And I would love if you didn't support that anymore because I, think well of you. And here's why I think that you would probably like to know about this. I don't think it's nearly like, to me, cancel culture is a word that is used to dismiss the idea of people facing
it's like identity politics. Right. It's a phrase used to dismiss the problem.
That's right.
To act like there isn't a problem. Yeah, well said. I like that. Yeah, I'm going to steal that. And to kind of tie it all together and wrap it all together, I mean, do you think what we're seeing with this iteration, this moment in the Black Lives Matter movement, which has been going on, some people say for about 7 years, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, starting around those horrible murders, but do you think that I feel like there's a similarity in what happened with the Me Too movement with a lot of reckoning happening, not nearly enough, but a lot of reckoning happening in corporate America and entertainment and politics for men that had been doing shitty things for a long time, getting called out, and for women and victims or survivors feeling safe to do the calling out, regardless of necessarily how much time had passed. I feel like now that's happening with kind of like with racism and bigotry. It's not the same extent, and maybe it's not a fair comparison, but I do feel like we're seeing now people that have done and said things in the past, from Jimmy Kimmel to 30 Rock, and other people saying, you know what, I've done bad things, or other people just calling folks out saying this person's been a racist forever at our job. Do you think that there's a comparison to be made with long-term racists and bigots being called out the way that misogynists and sexual assaulters were during Me Too movement? Am I making any sense? Is there any dots there?
No, you definitely are. I mean, I think in general that, like, again, I think that we are...
A reckoning is happening, I feel. I want to call it that, reckoning, sorry.
Yeah, I think that is fair, and there is some truth to that. I also think, though, that there is more of a sort of, like, I think the word reckoning, again, is really big.
Yeah, it's not the robust reckoning,
me, right? Like, yeah. It's like, God has come down and will strike you, and it has that vibe.
It's too much.
I feel like really what we're seeing is we're seeing what social media can do. We're seeing what can happen when you allow people to talk to each other and give them space to do so, and it is not organized in a historically hierarchical format.
Great
where
point. Yeah.
Like the patriarchy and the white men are given like a tremendous amount of preference. They still are in social media too, but you have a lot more evening in social media. There are more voices that can be uplifted.
Yeah, there's more of a meritocracy.
There is. I mean, it's not a perfect one, but
you're a great example of that. Like your popularity on Twitter is like, unless I'm missing something, almost entirely like because your tweets are so good. Like some people, their writing is so good that it makes them really popular really quick because they're so consistently funny and thoughtful the way that you are. I mean,
thank you.
Yeah,
I figure I just have a lot of hate followers too, though, so it kind of evens out.
Do you really feel that way? That there's a lot of people?
No, I block people so quickly. No,
oh, good. Oh, that's interesting. I rarely do. I don't have that much. I'm not that good on it, but I don't. I'm too needy. I'll keep some of the haters too and just fuck with them.
I won't, because it actually gets to me sometimes.
Yeah, well, granted, they're not really threatening me, so they're just calling me names usually.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it. Like it bothered me more earlier. Like I was more sensitive to it now, and I'm so calloused and numb and like whatever. Like go ahead and try. Like I can't even imagine what you can possibly say to me. But like I still just realized that my instinct is to want to like hit back.
Yeah.
And it's like so not healthy. It's just bad.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
I get like it's so. Why do I need to like engage in the shittiness? So rather than even like be tempted, I just tend to be like, fuck you, block you, and swat that flyer away next. Like, I don't need to like get into a.
Yeah, that's the healthy choice. I got into it with Dan Bongino and his million Cretan army, and one guy. I said I want to fight any and all of you to raise money for charity. And I've never fought anybody, and I don't plan to fight anybody. But it was just like I want to fight people and beat them up, but I don't fight, and I can't fight, and I'd probably get my ass kicked. But some guy created a Twitter account solely and exclusively promoting our fight. And June 20th, the date has come and gone. I didn't show up. He challenged me. He gave me a date and a place. I did not show up. He called me out, and I've yet to acknowledge any of his tweets for that Twitter account created just to fight Pete Dominic. But it was kind of fun to watch him and hope that he showed up in hopes I might.
I might have to follow this account, though.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. I want to know. I don't want to give it to anybody else, but.
Is this like, when the everybody cult leader was saying the world was going to end, like, but then it didn't? Does he now have to be like, no, I made an error in the calculations. It's going to happen, but now it's July 18th. Like,
I was just talking about that with a cult expert and how even when the event doesn't occur, they get dug in even deeper, which is fascinating.
That's what we're seeing with everybody who supports Trump. Like, it's just... digging, which I'm sure is probably what you talked about.
But yeah, well, it's weird. It is weird, though. I do find it weird with it being related to a disease, because this is such a transactional thing. You either get it or you don't. We saw this stupid tennis player get he got COVID positive, and he's been out there. I don't know. He's not American, but he's been out there, being ridiculing the masks, and he had this whole tournament, and in spite of it that he hosted, and now he's gotten sick. And it seems to not change people's minds, even if they know people who are dying. Either that, Maura, or I feel like a lot of the people who are getting sick are either elderly, or they're unhealthy, or they're disproportionately brown or black. And so a lot of these dumb white people who support Trump, like, oh, it's not going to be me. That's right.
I mean, there was an interview.
Or I'm not worried about it. Therefore, it's not going to be me or mine, and I'm not.
Oh yeah, it's total absolute selfishness. Outside of the Tulsa event, I don't know if you saw, there was an interview with a guy who was talking about that, just some random person attending, some MAGA head, who said oh yeah, no, I mean, was talking about being out there and with COVID and stuff, and in fact, his friends, they got it and they got sick, and their son died from the coronavirus.
What?
So, but at the same time, both sides are saying a lot of stuff. I think they've really politicized it. He
knows someone who lost their kid, and he's still
yes. Well, he still was just the Dems are also bad. I don't know.
Have you heard the people, and these are people at Trump, so I'm not trying to say they support Trump, they're at Trump rallies. I heard this one lady, I am protected by, I'm covered in Jesus' blood. Have you heard that one? So I'm protected, I'm covered
I want to hear you say it again. I want that Southern accent.
Well, it's some kind of cultural, someone's going to be offended. It's some kind of cultural appropriation, but I don't care. I am slathered in Jesus' blood. I am fine. Shouldn't laugh at that. You're going to be canceled. But the idea that you are that, you haven't heard anybody say that? I've heard several people say I'm covered in Jesus' blood, and therefore
I haven't heard that specific, covered in Jesus' blood.
Therefore, I'm not going to get sick. Or I don't know actually what they mean. But
I was going to say, where do you get Jesus' blood? Do you buy that in bulk, or?
It's actually, ironically enough, it's sold at BJ's.
Right next to the barbecue sauce,
in
right there.
Bulk, yeah.
Jesus' blood.
Yeah,
just the case.
Yep. And I think Anthony Fauci said if you can get your hands on it, it will protect you. But that's
remember that.
That's such a wild thing, and maybe I'm just I'm going to talk to a guest this week about that specifically. How these religious folks are in complete denial of their religious principles and support of this authoritarian leader, and think they're protected somehow by it.
Yeah,
it's crazy, nuts.
Yeah. No, it is. It's a desperate need to feel as though you have some sort of understanding in the universe, and that there's sense and order to it. And so you've decided what the rules are, and you're doing the right things. You pray to Jesus, so you're protected. But it's sort of this need to impose order that doesn't really exist in a very chaotic world. I feel like that's my really, really quick armchair analysis.
That's good. I like that analysis. Well done. You're so smart, Maura. All right. Thank you. I've taken enough of your time, and I really appreciate you joining me as always. It's been too long, and I'm happy to have you back. Thank you, Maura.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Always. All right. Maura Quint at Behind Your Back on Twitter. Thank you to all three of my guests, Wajahat Ali, Dr. Jason Johnson, Maura Quint. Not the best. Did anybody have any issues with the audio quality on any of the three of my guests? I am in the midst of, like I said, the studio change, and I didn't do Zoom today, and that's often sometimes better. And I also have people record locally sometimes. So if you have any issues with audio quality, I'd always love to hear from you. If it bothers you, if it's annoying, anything, I definitely want to make it as easy to listen to this show and as enjoyable and enlightening. Every day I want it to be a classroom where we talk to the smartest people we can find. So who would you like for me to invite on the show? And let me know what you like, what you don't like. And of course, if there are any technical issues, I always want to hear from you, and often I can go back and fix them. It's a one-man band, and I appreciate your support. So sign up for a paid subscription by going to the show notes wherever you're listening to the podcast, or just go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic and sign up there. Thank you to all of you, and know that you're not alone. No matter what, when you wake up, you think you're alone, you think you're depressed, anxious, emotionally upset of any kind, then know that you're not. And there's so many of us out there also struggling and trying to figure things out, as I am every day on this show. I appreciate you going for the ride with me. I really do. I love you. I'll talk to you tomorrow.